Something exciting and kinda unexpected popped out among the rocks of the Ica Valley in Peru. The bones of a really old whale that lived almost 40 million years ago. At first, no one was really impressed because the bones they found were big and weirdly shaped, so people just thought they were looking at giant boulders. I mean, that's cool too, but things got way better when they realized those were the remains of a very large ancient animal that roamed along the coast of ancient Peru. Plus, it was probably the heaviest creature that ever lived. Sorry, blue whale, I know you worked hard to get to the top. The length of over 100 feet and weight of more than 200 tons brought you the status of the biggest animal on our planet. But it seems you've held the title long enough. Time to hand it over to our next candidate, and that one's really gigantic. This ocean beast was probably shorter than the blue whale, but heavier, with a weight that could be between 93 tons and 370 tons. If it's closer to the higher number, it'll make Paracetus the biggest animal ever known to have lived on Earth. And it seems its weight was the result of having extremely thick, dense bones. You can see such bones today in manatees or some other early whales. Dense bones are a great tool for such marine mammals. This feature makes them heavy and allows them to stay submerged most of the time. But at the same time, if their body was too heavy, they would end up sinking all the time and they would waste too much energy to move back up to the surface. So, to avoid sinking, marine mammals need to have enough lighter tissues, like muscles and fat, to help them float in the water without using too much energy. Now, scientists didn't have the whole skeleton, which makes it hard to tell how big the animal was, but they used the ratio of the heavy bones to the lighter tissues in other marine mammals to estimate the overall weight of this giant ancient whale. Experts found these fossils about 13 years ago and spent the next decade freeing the whale from the rock. Its anatomy and age showed this whale was a cousin of Basilosaurus, a whale that had a long snout full of sharp teeth, and a sleek body similar to that of an eel. Even if Paracetus wasn't bigger than the blue whale, it was still a giant that ruled the ocean depths. Unlike modern whales, there's a possibility that this ancient fellow was a predator that liked to go after bigger prey. And this also changes how we see the history of whales. Scientists used to think these magnificent creatures became really big about 5 million years ago when they started eating lots of small creatures. But here's the proof that giant whales existed even before that. But it's still unclear how this whale managed to find enough food to sustain its enormous body. Plus, it's still hard to tell what exactly this ancient creature had on its menu. It was pretty large and not such a fast swimmer, so it's possible it searched for food in shallow waters. Then it probably ate crustaceans, clams, or some other small animals hiding in the sand. One theory says it was a scavenger, which basically means it munched on remains of everything that would come its way. It's not so unusual to find marine animals in deserts. Many of these regions used to be covered with water anyway. The Sahara in Africa is a perfect example. About 50 to 100 million years ago, this was not a dry desert, but a shallow saltwater body called the Trans-Saharan Seaway. The land is not wet there anymore, of course, but people who lived in that area knew about it because they used to find old shells across the desert. The sea was about 164 feet deep. That sounds enough for a nice swim. Some would say this area looked like modern Puerto Rico, with lots of sun and shallow water. Mangrove forests were a common thing as well as seafloors covered with mollusks, like snails and clams. The marine sediment that was left behind after the sea had dried up is full of different fossils. And the animal that lived in that ancient underwater world didn't look friendly. Plus, they were much bigger than their relatives from modern times, so a regular-sized human would end up as a snack, not even a whole meal. Normally, when animals live on small islands, they can become much bigger than their relatives from the mainland. This is something we call island gigantism, and it happens because there are more resources or fewer predators on islands. Maybe the same thing happened in the Trans-Saharan Seaway. Even though it wasn't an actual island, the water moved in and out, which created little pockets of water. And specific conditions in these pockets might have helped animals grow bigger. So we're talking about giant sea snakes, catfish, and fish that no longer exist today. One had incredibly strong jaws, and the animal used them to eat hard things and even crush shells. Their teeth showed they were fierce predators other animals had every reason to be afraid of. They went through some changes when it came to diet, similar to some types of piranhas. And the competition to get to the top of the food chain wasn't a joke. Not when there were also such large predators as sharks, crocodiles, and ancient relatives of elephants. Sahara went through different phases. If you could use a time machine and take a peek at Earth's largest hot desert as it was about 6,000 years ago, you wouldn't have to struggle with sand and heat. You'd have a nice walk through a green and pretty lush place. In the past, people who lived in that area didn't leave drawings on cave walls that showed camels, sand dunes, and scorpions. All those things you'd see in today's Sahara. Instead, they drew crocodiles. That's additional evidence that the Sahara used to have a lot of water and plants enough to support these big yet scary animals. Around 3 billion years ago, Earth might have been mostly covered with water. Today, it's about 71% of its surface, but it seems that our planet used to be a giant ocean world with no continents at all, just some scattered islands. Scientists studied special rocks in Western Australia that formed in a place deep under the ocean called a hydrothermal vent system. To explain this better, it's important to mention two common oxygen types, O16 and O18. O18 is heavier because it has extra neutrons. O16 evaporates from water more easily, and as researchers studied an old ocean floor, they found a lot of O18, more than in today's oceans. This way, they realized ancient Earth had less dry land than Earth today. Australia is a good spot to conduct these studies because a long time ago, it also used to be a beautiful place with large animals and lush rainforests. But as time went by, the land became drier and Australia had more deserts formed, such as the Great Victoria Desert. Rainforest remained only on the edges of the continent. What happens with deserts across the globe is called desertification. That's when land that used to be good for growing things turns into a desert or something similar. Our planet changes over time, together with its climate. But desertification also happens because of human activities, like mining, farming, and building cities. And when land turns into a desert, it's a problem because it can't support people and animals anymore. Food doesn't grow there. There's not enough clean water, and animals lose their homes. To help with this problem, there's a plan many countries agreed to. They decided to work with farmers to take care of the land, fix damaged areas, and manage water better. All in all, to make our planet a better place for life.
I bet you've never heard of the legendary oasis of Zerzura. This ancient city is said to be hidden somewhere deep in the Sahara Desert, and its discovery could mean unimaginable riches and untold secrets. According to an anonymous 15th century Arabic guide, the key to unlocking the city lies in the beak of a bird carved on the city gate. Zerzura might not be as popular as Machu Picchu or the pyramids, but that just makes it more mysterious. Legend has it that Zerzura is built around this big oasis somewhere in the desert west of the Nile. Apparently, it's made out of white stone and has all these luxurious houses and gold decorations. The story goes that a scribe wrote down the account of a traveler who stumbled upon Zerzura while looking for his lost camel. At one point in his journey, the man got caught up in a sandstorm, where he got separated from the rest of his group. The traveler kept wandering in the desert for days, and then, out of nowhere, two men showed up and guided him to the city of Zerzura. The traveler described this city as an oasis filled with little birds and made out of pure white stonework. The city is also said to be guarded by giants. In 1835, an English Egyptologist named John Gardner Wilkinson mentioned the city in one of his books. He spoke to a man from Egypt who found the city by accident after days of wandering through the desert. He mentioned some ruins, unusual stonework, and a large oasis surrounded by palm trees. The man even gave some instructions on how the city could be found, indicating that it might be in the western desert of Egypt. But here's the kicker. Even though a group of explorers went out to find Zerzura, they didn't succeed. At the same time, they did stumble upon a bunch of previously unknown oases. In the early 1900s, numerous expeditions were sent to find the city, including one with a fleet of Ford Model A trucks. But, alas, none were successful. Others say Zerzura did exist at one point, but not anymore. It's possible it was swallowed by the desert. It's believed that back in the day, the Sahara Desert was actually green. Scientists even found traces of ancient rivers that flowed through the area 100,000 years ago, creating green corridors across the desert. But Zerzura might have never been real to begin with. Maybe it only existed in the minds of people, a figment of their imagination as they were struggling in the African desert. For thousands of years, people have been obsessed with the hunt for another lost city, Atlantis. But if this place really existed, where on Earth, or under the sea, could it be? According to Plato, Atlantis was an actual place, and it was supposedly located somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, near the Strait of Gibraltar. But how did this mythical city become synonymous with a perfect, paradise-like society? Well, you can thank Ignatius Donnelly for that. The American writer published a book in 1882 where he outlined 13 hypotheses about the existence of Atlantis. Donnelly truly believed that this lost city was where ancient humans lived in peace and joy for centuries. Donnelly even thought that Atlantis was the original source of many ancient civilizations around the world. And if we just followed Plato's clues, we could totally find Atlantis. Sounds like a treasure hunt, right? What inspired Donnelly to go on this quest in the first place, you might ask? Apparently, an amateur archaeologist discovered the city of Troy, using Homer's The Iliad as a guide. Well, if Troy was real, then why not Atlantis? Back in the day, some people believed that America was the legendary Atlantis. Columbus really stirred up some excitement when he brought back news about the New World to Europe. But the real hunt for Atlantis didn't really start until the 20th and 21st centuries. Some people tried to connect the dots between a volcanic eruption on the island of Santorini and the destruction of Minoan settlements. But in 2018, a team of investigators claimed they had nailed it, announcing they had discovered concrete proof that Atlantis had existed. What was their evidence, you ask? A series of mysterious circles in a national park in Spain. But the circles turned out to be nothing more than experimental ponds for studying zooplankton. Let's face it, there's no real evidence that Plato's lost city of Atlantis actually existed. But it doesn't make searching for it any less exciting, does it? The Fountain of Youth isn't a lost city per se, but it is another mythical location that many have claimed to have stumbled upon over the years. Long ago, people were obsessed with the idea of living forever, or at least extending their lives as much as possible. Each culture had its own wild story, like the Greeks talking about a magic fountain that let people live longer, or Alexander the Great finding a river of paradise that could heal the wounded. Japanese legends spoke of hot springs that could make you young again, while the Caribbean locals talked about the restorative powers of the water in one of their own mystical lands. Explorers searched far and wide for these magical waters, but nothing. Probably the most famous of all was the story of the Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon, who thought he'd found it in Florida. Now, Ponce de Leon was quite a character. He sailed with Columbus, and became an important figure in the area now known as the Dominican Republic. He found gold in Puerto Rico and even became the island's administrator. But when the ruler of Spain decided to replace him in his duties, he got upset and decided to explore Florida, looking for gold and the elusive Fountain of Youth. He explored the Bahamas, but sadly, he didn't find any gold or magic water. He did, however, make his way to Florida. He explored the coast and even discovered the Gulf Stream. Unfortunately, his last expedition didn't go well, and he was wounded. But the legend of him searching for the Fountain of Youth lived on. Even though historians don't think he was really looking for the Fountain of Youth, thousands of people visit the Fountain of Youth Archaeological Park every year to try the sulfur-smelling water. It's the oldest attraction in Florida, which has been around since the 17th century. Some say the water has unusual properties, but I'll leave that up to you to decide after you visit this place. Norse mythology has its own mysterious land called Thule. It's said to be somewhere between Scandinavia and Iceland, where the sun barely shines and the cold bites hard. The folks there survive on a diet of millet, herbs, fruits, and roots, washed down with a grain and honey brew. As for its exact location, scholars can't seem to agree on it to this day. The legendary ancient Greek explorer Pytheas was said to be the first to stumble upon Thule during his quest for tin mines. He sailed his way up north, passing by Scotland, and after 6 long days of sailing, he reached Thule. The people there, according to Pytheas, were quite primitive, but that's no surprise since they were just simple farmers living off the land. They showed Pytheas where the sun set on the shortest day of the year. They also told him that in winter, the sun never rose at all, and in summer, there was no night. For many years, historians have been debating the true identity of this mythical land of Thule. Some say it's Iceland, while others claim it's Norway. A little bit of progress has been made recently with the help of a team of researchers. If their findings are correct, Thule might be the elusive island of Smola. That's farther south than any of the Norwegian islands that were on the list of contenders. It may be too soon to celebrate, but it does look like Thule has finally been found.
The Sahara Desert is like a Mad Max movie. Scorching heat, endless dunes, and an overall barren wasteland. A place where no one could live, right? Well, forget all you know about it, because 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was a lush paradise of grasslands, lakes, and rivers, and the home of a ghost civilization that vanished without a trace. Our tale begins in the 1930s, when a Hungarian explorer stumbled upon a cave in the middle of the Sahara. Inside, he found something bizarre: ancient rock paintings of people swimming in a lake, surrounded by giraffes, hippos, and crocodiles. At the time, everybody shrugged it off as some symbolic depiction of the afterlife, because, really, who would imagine a lake in the Sahara? Well, fast forward some 70 years later, when a group of archaeologists made a discovery that flipped the script. In a rock shelter in Libya, they unearthed 15 mummies, along with baskets, ceramic pots, and other everyday items. This may look like prehistoric junk to most people, but to archaeologists, it was like uncovering a key piece of evidence. Those people weren't just passing through, they lived here. You see, those weren't just any mummies. They were some of the oldest naturally mummified humans ever found, dating back over 7,000 years. Take that, Egypt. 2 of them still had readable DNA, preserved thanks to a rare natural mummification process, almost a miracle considering the Sahara's climate's ability to turn everything into, well, beef jerky. Scientists struggled to understand where those mummies came from for a while, because the mitochondrial DNA they recovered was not helpful at all. But thanks to scientific progress, they eventually managed to do a full genome analysis that revealed some weird secrets. Those people belonged to a human lineage that was completely unknown, and they lived isolated from the rest of humanity for thousands of years. For decades, researchers assumed that the place where they lived, the Green Sahara, was like a prehistoric highway, a lush corridor that humans and animals used to migrate between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean. But the mummies demolished that theory, like a hippo sitting on a sandcastle. Their DNA showed zero genetic mixing with sub-Saharan and Eurasian migrants, keeping their genes pure for 7,000 years. Their closest genetic relatives weren't their neighbors living right below the famous desert, but some ancient hunter-gatherers from Morocco, and even some guys that lived in the Czech Republic, when it wasn't even a country yet, 50,000 years ago. We're not out of the woods yet, because those mummies also carried some teeny-tiny traces of Neanderthal DNA, just 10% of the amount found in modern Eurasians. Now, if you paid attention in school, then you know that Neanderthals lived in Europe and Asia, and early humans only mixed with them after migrating out of Africa. But those green Sahara folks never left Africa. So how did they get Neanderthal genes? The leading theory is that their ancestors mingled with Neanderthals in North Africa 50,000 years ago before settling in the Sahara and cutting off contact with the outside world. Archaeologists also found cattle bones and tools made of stone and wood at that rock shelter, proving that those people led a thriving pastoral lifestyle. This discovery made scientists scratch their heads for a while because, you see, animal domestication was not developed in Africa. So how did they learn it if they never mingled with anyone? Did they have ancient YouTube tutorials? Probably not. The researchers believe they must have traded knowledge with neighboring groups, but just knowledge, no saliva. It's almost too hard to believe that no outsiders mixed with them. After all, who wouldn't want to live in a thriving civilization in the middle of a green paradise, drinking milk, eating meat, and even using animal blood as a protein source? Ooh, yummy. They didn't have to hunt for every meal, thanks to their livestock, and the abundant water made life pretty sweet. And yet, they never married outsiders. Why? Maybe it was a cultural choice to never date outside their own group. Or maybe the landscape itself kept them isolated. This is where scientists place their bets. They believe that the dense forests and rivers that existed in the Green Sahara acted like nature's no trespassing sign, creating a geographical barrier that isolates animals, plants, and whole societies. This isolation is the reason why their genes were so unique. These guys weren't swapping spit with anyone else. But this genetic time capsule almost didn't survive. For most of the last ice age, the Sahara was even harsher than today, a true dead zone where humans couldn't survive. 70,000 years ago, even the toughest people disappeared, retreating to the Nile Valley and the Mediterranean coast. Why? Because Earth was a climate bully. Massive glaciers stole all the moisture, weakening monsoons until rain clouds barely reached North Africa. Then came the knockout punches. Armadas of icebergs flooded the North Atlantic, triggering devastating droughts each time. This was the Sahara's ultimate keep-out era. Now, you're probably wondering how in the world the Sahara turned green after all this, and then went back to being a desert again. Well, it all started 15,000 years ago, I wasn't around then, when Earth was shaking off the last ice age. Our planet's axis was a bit wobbly, and because of that, the northern hemisphere got closer to the sun, getting extra sunlight and heat. This eternal summer turned North Africa into a giant moisture magnet, pulling water from the Atlantic and making it all rain down on the Sahara. The result of this ridiculous amount of rain was a lush savanna, complete with lakes the size of small countries. But the African humid period was not just a one-time miracle. The truth is, this eternal on and off switch between green and desert happened to the Sahara more than 230 times since the desert was born. During one of these events, the Sahara even expanded, getting bigger than it is today. So when the Green Sahara showed up, you can bet it brought the ultimate ecosystem glow-up. This wasn't just a light dusting of grass. We're talking full makeover. The transformation was so complete, it even reshaped animal populations. Cheetahs suddenly struggled with the new prey dynamics, while rodents like the multi-mammate mouse thrived in the suddenly abundant grasslands. But don't pack your prehistoric swim trunks just yet. This paradise had teeth. The Sahara was an ecological maze of crocodile-infested rivers, malaria-carrying mosquitoes, and big cats lurking in the tall grass. Crossing it would have been like playing a real-life game of hungry hippos. This is probably why more groups didn't settle permanently. The Sahara's climate cycled between wet and dry every 20,000 years, hardly a stable zip code. For most ancient people, it was smarter to treat the Green Sahara like an all-you-can-eat buffet, grab resources and leave before the desert returned. Still, this Green Sahara period lasted for 10,000 years, giving our mystery shepherds plenty of time to thrive. But around 5,000 years ago, Earth's axis shifted again, the rains moved away, and the Sahara dried up faster than a puddle in July. As the desert returned, the shepherds from the Green Sahara had no choice but to pack up their livestock and leave. Some researchers believe they migrated toward the Nile, laying the groundwork for ancient Egypt, so I guess their legacy lives on. Besides, their pure lineage may be extinct by now, but some faint genes of the mummies can still be found in the people that live in North Africa today. But the introvert mummies were not the only ones using the Green Sahara as an Airbnb. They actually had neighbors just around the corner, in a lakeside village in Niger to be exact. Those people thrived for 5,000 years and left behind the oldest Sahara Desert cemetery, including a man buried in a turtle shell, a grinning Halloween man with filed teeth, and a heartbreaking family embrace frozen in time, victims of the very waters that sustained them. Eventually, those people disappeared too, just like it happened to our antisocial friends. This proves that this desert outsmarts everyone, with a landscape that gives paradise with one hand and takes it away with the other. There you are, trekking across a desert on foot. It's hot, you're terribly thirsty, and now you gotta walk around this stupid wall. Wait, a wall in the middle of a sandy, lifeless nowhere? Exactly, a wall in the northern Saudi desert. Archaeologists have just made a super exciting discovery, and what they found was not just a single wall. No, it was a whole ancient walled city that might date back to 2400 BCE. They think this place was home to around 500 people and could have been used for 1,000 years. This discovery is groundbreaking. It means that the area could have been way more advanced than anyone expected. This city was well organized, with different zones for living, towers and strong walls for protection, and different sections for all kinds of daily life. This ancient city, now called Al-Natab, was basically an oasis town, and it's great since it can give us a peek into what life might have been like in this desert thousands of years ago. Apparently, they had clearly separated areas, like residential sections, a cemetery, farmland, and even a town center. This oasis city, found in the Khaybar area, is the first big organized settlement from the 2nd or 3rd millennium BCE that researchers have uncovered in northwestern Arabia. The first survey showed that this town, which covered about 6 acres, had several districts, including the residential area, the cemetery, and the legal one, with courts. The houses were set up in neat rows, all connected by small roads. Those streets kept the residential area separate from the rest of the town. Back then, most people in this region were nomadic herders, always moving around. But archaeologists have been sure that during the Bronze Age, northwest Arabia had small walled towns and oasis centers scattered across it. These connected oasis towns were unique, offering secure places for people to live, store goods, and trade. They started showing the beginnings of urban planning, which hints that people of that time were already starting to settle down and organize communities more seriously. The research team estimated that there were about 50 homes in Al-Natab, but that number could go up to 70 as they keep digging. They think that a few hundred people lived there, and probably one of the coolest things is that some houses went up to 3 stories tall. Built on a slope near a couple of major trade routes, this city was set up in a prime spot. Now, one of the most impressive things about this place is its water supply. The oasis had springs and aquifers, which are underground water sources, and such conditions were perfect for farming. Those water sources meant residents could grow their own food, making the town self-sufficient. The outer walls probably helped control who could enter the town and get access to its resources. This settled way of life was an impressive shift from nomadic living to a more agro-pastoral lifestyle, which means a mix of farming and herding animals. Another find that supports this theory is a bunch of tools, like grinding stones, mortars, and pestles, discovered inside the town. People there must have ground grains and prepared food. They had a diet of cereals, meat, and milk from animals they raised themselves. These astonishing findings show that the inhabitants of the town could easily feed themselves and were surprisingly advanced for that time. Thanks to better access to Saudi Arabia in the past couple of decades, archaeologists now have a much clearer picture of what life there was like thousands of years ago. The most exciting thing is that Al-Nata might have been part of a whole network of similar fortified oasis towns spread across the region, and all of these connected sites could show us how trade routes and small settlements worked together at that time in that arid area. Now, at the same time, this recent discovery isn't the only one that has the scientific world buzzing with excitement. How about we visit Egypt and see for ourselves? After all, archaeologists have just found a stash of ancient Egyptian and Greek treasure underwater. They were exploring the lost city of Thonis Heraklion off the coast of Egypt, which sank more than 1,000 years ago. This city was legendary, and nobody even knew where it was until it was rediscovered in 2000. Now they're uncovering more and more, and on this dive, they found a pile of gold and silver treasures. Those were probably used in rituals to bless Egyptian pharaohs when they took the throne. The researchers even found an ancient Greek temple dedicated to Aphrodite and some super-old Greek weapons. Frank Gaudio, the lead archaeologist, said it was astonishing that those delicate objects had survived the disaster that brought the city down. Back in its prime, Thonis Heraklion was one of the biggest port cities in the Mediterranean. It was a huge center of social life and was the main entry point for ships from Greece coming into Egypt. But tragically, due to rising waters, earthquakes, and a catastrophic tidal wave, the soil underneath the city literally turned into mush, and then the entire city sank into the Mediterranean. It was forgotten until Gaudio's team found it in 2000. Since then, they've been uncovering new parts of the city and piecing together its history little by little. If a lost underwater city doesn't seem impressive enough, we can travel to the Amazon. The discovery made there is truly mind-boggling. For centuries, people have talked about lost cities deep in the Amazon, like El Dorado, that mythical city of gold that lured Spanish explorers into the jungle. A lot of them never came back. Then, in the 1900s, a British explorer named Percy Fawcett went searching for what he called the lost city of Z, and he too disappeared. But now, finally, scientists have actually found proof that those lost cities in the Amazon were real all along. A team of scientists use a tech called LiDAR, which basically allows you to see through thick jungle from above by bouncing light beams off the ground. They flew over the jungle in Bolivia in a helicopter about 650 feet up and mapped out those hidden ancient cities. What they found were ruins of a huge urban settlement built by the Kasarabi people who lived there from 500 to 1400 CE. And it wasn't just a couple of buildings here and there. No, the LiDAR maps revealed massive urban centers, pyramids, platforms, roads, canals, and causeways, all carefully laid out. Turns out the Amazon wasn't just an untouched jungle. It was once home to big, complex cities. A scientist from the German Archaeological Institute explained that Europeans had long ignored the possibility of ancient Amazonian cities, but the LiDAR maps showed they were wrong. The new maps have revealed 26 sites, including 11 that no one even knew existed. Researchers have discovered two main city sites, Landivar and Kotoka. They had massive moat causeways stretching out like spokes on a wheel, linking the main cities with smaller surrounding settlements. Some of the canals even connected the cities to rivers and a big lake, which allowed water to flow through the area. Over the years, scientists found scattered ruins all over this region, but the thick jungle made it nearly impossible to connect the dots and see if or how they were related. With LiDAR, the whole layout came to life, showing that those sites were part of a much larger organized urban system. It's now also clear that the sites had a greater meaning, since everything is lined up in a way that could be symbolic of the spiritual beliefs of the inhabitants. The Kasarabi culture isn't as famous as the Maya, but they had a thriving society in an area that faced huge challenges, like yearly flooding. And although the nearby Andes had their own monumental sites, the Kasarabi were doing something absolutely unique. They even had reservoirs to store water, which suggests they might have been dealing with occasional droughts, which is pretty unusual for the Amazon. Actually, those terrible droughts could be why the Kasarabi eventually left their cities around 1400 CE. Now, if you were to check out the Sahara from space right now, instead of a barren wasteland, you'd spot a surprising sight. Dry land sprinkled with some lakes and rivers in Morocco and Algeria, all thanks to some heavy rains in early September 2024. These aren't oases. This is just the Sahara going back to the factory settings. Believe it or not, eons ago, one of the biggest deserts on Earth was actually a lush paradise full of greenery. Let's first see how the Sahara turned into a desert. During the last ice age, Earth was much colder, and big ice sheets covered a lot of the land. At that time, the Sahara Desert was significantly bigger than it is today, and on our planet there were fewer tropical forests, and the cooler temperatures changed how rain was distributed in the tropics. Now, normally, warm air rises in the tropics, which helps create rain. Since it was colder during the Ice Age, this system got, well, messed up, and less rain fell in some areas. This caused more dry and desert-like conditions in places that are usually wetter. There was also a lot of dust blowing around in the Sahara Desert, which scientists found in old ocean sediments. But about 12,500 years ago, something surprising happened. The dust levels went way down. This meant that the Sahara got a lot wetter, which is a sign that the climate suddenly warmed up for a while before cooling down again. After 12,500 years ago, the Sahara became a much greener place, like a savanna, because a weather pattern called the Intertropical Convergence Zone, a mouthful indeed, moved north during summer. This wet period was at its best around 4,000 years ago, when temperatures were a bit warmer than today. At that time, more rain fell in the Ethiopian highlands, which made the Nile River carry more sediment. However, there was another big change called a Heinrich event, which caused the Intertropical Convergence Zone to move back south. This led to the Sahara and Arabian regions drying out quickly. Because of this, the Nile River had much less flooding between 2700 and 2100 BCE. Long story short, well, too late for that. The Sahara has gone through wet and dry cycles due to changes in the climate and weather patterns over thousands of years. Up until recently, we've known about the Sahara in its dry era. But in September 2024, an unusual cyclone rolled through. It hit Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, and filled those dry lakes and rivers. The satellite images from NASA of before and after the rains are stunning. It's like the Sahara has had a makeover. Some areas in North Africa received up to 8 inches of rain. For comparison, Seattle gets about 40 inches per year, only 5 times what the Sahara received. I say only for one simple reason. Seattle has a reputation for being quite rainy, while the Sahara does not. The tricky part is those 8 inches. Essentially, the entire yearly quota for this area fell in a matter of moments. So, in a way, it might have felt rainier in the Sahara than in Seattle. The mountains funnel the water into ephemeral lakes in northern Algeria, which recently expanded to over 70 square miles and reached depths of more than 7 feet. That's enough water to sustain it for a year. So what exactly are these ephemeral lakes? Well, they're basins that fill up for a short time each year, but might stay dry for several years if the rain doesn't cooperate. Sometimes water flows into them from a small surrounding area, or it can just be good old-fashioned rain. Now, a big question arises. How come these lakes exist in the first place? Well, generally they form because there's excess water trapped on the surface. But the soil in the Sahara is incredibly dry. Shouldn't it act like a sponge? It must be thirsting for moisture. Well, think about how eagerly your potted plant drinks up water when you return home from a vacation. However, no matter how parched it is, dry soil can only absorb a limited amount of water, which is often quite small. And just like your potted plant, it doesn't necessarily drink it all. You might simply be overwatering. Or, if you check the saucer below, you could find a mini flood. Another significant factor preventing the soil from absorbing water is the lack of vegetation. Under normal conditions, trees, shrubs, and various plants help retain moisture. In the desert, however, it's nearly impossible. There may be a few palm trees, but that's about it. This also explains the formation of those temporary lakes. Precipitation that isn't held by plants accumulates in low-lying valleys and depressions, creating these fleeting bodies of water. These lakes may only last for a limited time, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't have names. For instance, the beautiful lake adorned with swaying palms that you see is called Lake Yasmina, located in the oasis town of Mertsoga. In certain areas of the desert, where the dunes rise, it may appear as though you're looking at a mirage, but it's not. The sand dunes are partially covered by water. Remember how I mentioned 8 inches? Well, that's not entirely accurate for some regions. In fact, there are places where the flooding is so extensive that the palms are submerged up to their crowns. Now, the last time we saw a downpour this intensive was 30 to 50 years ago. But this rain is more than welcome. After 6 consecutive years of drought, Morocco really needed it. Lakes that had been dry for decades, like Lake Ariki, are finally getting some much-needed water. A recent analysis revealed that out of the hundreds of storms that have hit the region since 2000, only 6 brought enough rain to start filling up this lake. And of those, only 2 resulted in a lake level higher than what we saw in September 2024. So while this torrential rain seems like a blessing, the big question is, will it last? The answer is yes. When humid air from near the equator meets the hot, dry air from the north, the Sahara Desert tends to get more rain. Scientists say this collision zone is shifting further north as the planet warms, and it warms, so it's likely to keep moving that way over the next couple of decades. So I seem a bit overly optimistic about this, and the truth is, the news isn't entirely positive. The reality is that no one was truly prepared for a flood situation like this. Moreover, remember that this isn't some Southeast Asian country where people are accustomed to dealing with water. This is the bone-dry Sahara. That said, I think you know what I'm getting at. Tragically, at least 18 people lost their lives to the intense rains in southern Morocco. The authorities are gearing up for even more heavy rain in the region. But if that's the case, could it mean the Sahara is facing extinction? And what would that even mean for us? It might sound a bit strange, but our planet actually relies on deserts, and the Sahara is no different. At first glance, it may seem like a barren wasteland, and it's nothing to write home about. But deserts play a crucial role in our ecosystem. They act as major carbon storage sites and are considered net carbon sinks, with the Sahara alone holding an estimated 1 trillion metric tons of carbon. In the fight against climate change, these existing deserts are like a buffer, helping to keep the temperatures within acceptable levels. Yeah, deserts are scorching hot, but they act as the world's air conditioning. Plus, desert sands are an unexpected source of nutrients for lush areas like tropical rainforests. Believe it or not, scientists have found that the sand particles from the Sahara have a hand in nurturing the Amazon rainforest. These particles travel across the Atlantic Ocean, riding the winds all the way to South America, where they enrich the soil in the Amazon basin. Without the Sahara, experts believe the Amazon rainforest could face serious collapse.
Something unusual has been happening in the Sahara Desert. In regions that were once completely dry, scientists are now detecting signs of water. Satellite images show patches of vegetation spreading across areas that used to be bare sand. In some places, seasonal lakes are forming after rainfall. And in certain regions, underground water is even beginning to reappear closer to the surface. This raises a surprising question. Is the Sahara Desert starting to turn green again? At first, that idea sounds unlikely. The Sahara is the largest hot desert on Earth, covering about 9 million square kilometers, roughly the size of the United States. It stretches across North Africa and includes some of the driest places on the planet. In many areas, Rainfall is less than 25 millimeters per year, and some regions can go years without a single significant rain event. But despite these extreme conditions, the Sahara has not always been a desert. Thousands of years ago, much of this region looked completely different. During a period known as the African Humid Period, which lasted roughly from 11,000 to 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was covered with grasslands, rivers, and large lakes. Fossil evidence shows that animals like hippos, crocodiles, and even early human populations lived in areas that are now completely dry. So what changed? The main driver is Earth's orbital cycles. Small variations in the tilt and wobble of the planet affect how sunlight is distributed across different regions. Around 5,000 years ago, these shifts weakened the African monsoon system, reducing rainfall across North Africa. Over time, vegetation died off, soils dried out, and the Sahara transitioned into the desert we know today. But the climate system that created the Sahara is not fixed. And in recent decades, scientists have started to observe signs of change. Satellite data collected over the past 30 to 40 years shows that parts of the Sahara, especially along its southern edge in the Sahel region, have experienced increased rainfall. Some areas have seen precipitation rise by 10 to 30% compared to the severe drought periods of the 1970s and 1980s. This increase in rainfall has had visible effects. Vegetation has expanded across parts of the Sahel, with grasses and shrubs returning to areas that were previously barren. Researchers using satellite imagery have tracked a measurable greening trend across large portions of North Africa. In some cases, temporary lakes have formed in low-lying desert basins after heavy rains. These lakes may only last for weeks or months, but they indicate that water is becoming more available in regions that were once extremely dry. Another important factor is groundwater. Beneath the Sahara lies one of the largest underground water reserves in the world, known as the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer System. This aquifer contains vast amounts of fossil water that accumulated thousands of years ago when the region was much wetter. In certain areas, changes in rainfall and surface conditions may allow some of this groundwater to move closer to the surface. While this does not mean new water is being created, it can make existing water more accessible in localized regions. However, the situation is complex. Not all parts of the Sahara are becoming greener. While some areas show increased rainfall, others remain extremely dry, or are even experiencing higher temperatures and evaporation rates. Climate models suggest that warming global temperatures could intensify weather patterns, leading to both heavier rainfall events and longer dry periods. This means the Sahara is not simply turning green in a uniform way. Instead, it is becoming more variable. Some regions may see more vegetation and seasonal water, while others continue to face desert conditions. There is also evidence that human activity plays a role in these changes. Land management, agriculture, and reforestation efforts in parts of the Sahel have helped stabilize soils and support vegetation growth. Projects like the Great Green Wall Initiative aim to restore degraded land across Africa by planting trees and improving land use practices. These efforts can enhance the natural recovery of vegetation, especially when combined with increased rainfall. But scientists are careful about making long-term predictions. The African Humid Period developed over thousands of years due to gradual changes in Earth's orbit. The current changes observed in the Sahara are happening on much shorter timescales and are influenced by both natural climate variability and human-driven climate change. Some climate models suggest that parts of North Africa could experience increased rainfall in the future. Others predict expanding desert conditions due to rising temperatures. At this point, both trends are possible, depending on how global climate systems evolve. What is clear is that the Sahara is more dynamic than it may appear. Even the largest desert on Earth is not static. It responds to changes in climate, atmospheric circulation, and environmental conditions. In certain regions today, grasses are returning, water is briefly pooling on the surface, and ecosystems are beginning to reappear in places that were once completely barren. These changes are small compared to the vast size of the desert, but they are measurable, and they are real. The idea of a green Sahara may sound like something from the distant past, but the evidence shows that under the right conditions, the landscape can change again. For now, scientists continue to monitor rainfall patterns, vegetation growth, and underground water systems across North Africa. Because even in one of the driest places on Earth, the environment is still evolving.
The Sahara Desert looks like a golden sea from above. We see endless dunes, many blue and green oases, and a huge black spot that covers an area of 17,000 square miles. Wait, what? What is it? It's a pretty gigantic territory, but why have we rarely heard of it and never seen it in movies or documentaries? Perhaps it appeared recently. Oh no, this black spot is millions of years old. Let's go down and explore the area. This place looks flat from above, but it's extremely uneven. There are black hills, slopes, and strange, tall cones everywhere. Some of them reach a height of more than 330 feet. It's higher than the Statue of Liberty, and the highest peak reaches about 3,900 feet above sea level. All these formations seem to be burnt out. This whole area resembles a giant testing ground where something big was blown up or where a large-scale fire burned. In some way, it's true. There was a fire here, not on the ground, but under it, and then it burst out. This entire territory is covered with molten lava. It came out of the ground and spread in different directions, burning everything in its path. Then, a new portion of lava came out and solidified on top of the previous layer. And so, with time, the lava formed a hill, a cone, and all the mountains located there. So, turns out this place is covered with small volcanoes? Kinda. There are about 150 of them. They're all extinct, and they're not exactly volcanoes. This place is called the Harouj Volcanic Field. But the volcanoes here don't look the way you imagine them. Here you can find different types, small vents, chimneys, and even shield volcanoes. Do you remember what shields look like in historical epic movies about ancient Greece or Sparta? These are round, flat plates with a smooth protrusion, so shield volcanoes look kinda like these inverted shields. They don't turn into a hill or a mountain because the lava coming from these volcanoes is low viscosity, more fluid, and consists mainly of basalt. It spreads further than ordinary lava and takes longer to cool. As a result of such lava eruptions, vast and massive structures appear much wider and lower than ordinary volcanoes. Some of the volcanic rocks here are up to 6 million years old. The most recent eruptions occurred only a few thousand years ago, so it's quite safe to wander around here and take photos. Probably. But why are there so many volcanoes here? Most volcanoes on the planet appear along fault lines crossing the Earth's tectonic plates. Imagine that our planet is like a jigsaw puzzle. Fault lines are the places where the puzzle pieces are attached to each other. When seismic activity occurs, red-hot magma comes out of those cracks, and at that moment, a volcano appears. Okay, so the Harouj Volcanic Field is a huge fault, right? No. The strange thing is, there's no fault line here. Moreover, it isn't even located next to any of those fault lines. Volcanoes here have a rather unusual origin. For some reason, a huge magma reservoir formed under this area, filled with a surge of molten rock, and there was so much of it that it began to bubble out from different spots. These were not explosive eruptions like those of ordinary volcanoes. Magma here poured out smoothly from numerous vents, turning the ground a dark, coal-black color. All the volcanoes here are extinct, but even if they were to awaken, it wouldn't be a sudden disaster. You'd most likely have time to escape. Okay, Now let's move to the Karakum Desert, which is located in Turkmenistan. This desert covers about 70% of the country's territory. It's 135,000 square miles of sun-scorched, barren land. Even if you wander through these hot plains, valleys, and ridges for several days, you still won't leave this desert. But if you go to the north-central part of the desert, especially at night, you can see something fascinating. Already from afar, you will see a bright pillar of light, as if someone started a large-scale fire. You come closer and see a fantastic sight, a huge pit with bright flames. This place is called the Darvaza Crater, and it's not a volcano. The fire has been burning here at night and during the day for weeks, months, even years. This huge pit burns 24/7 and attracts a lot of tourists. Nobody knows for sure how this crater formed, but the most popular story says geologists came here in the early 70s to drill for oil. They got to work, but the ground collapsed beneath them. 3 sinkholes appeared here and they started leaking methane. In small quantities, this gas is safe. It's used as fuel, burning in gas turbines and steam generators to produce electricity. In everyday life, this gas helps to heat houses and prepare food. But in large quantities, methane can cause health problems. It's colorless and odorless, and you may not notice that you're breathing it in. Methane is non-toxic, but it has a suffocating effect, which can lead to serious physical damage. Also, a methane leakage can harm the environment because it's a greenhouse gas. Methane emissions can lead to an increase in global temperatures and the greenhouse effect. So, let's go back to our geologist in Turkmenistan. You know those scenes where a fire hydrant breaks in the middle of the city or a pipe bursts and the streets flood with water? Those geologists had a similar accident with methane. A huge amount of gas began to seep from under the ground, and something had to be done about it. You're in the middle of a desert next to a huge pit where dangerous explosive gas is leaking out non-stop. What would you do? Set it on fire, of course. Scientists thought the fire would soon burn all their gas reserves and everything would be fine. They set it on fire and started waiting. An hour? A day? A week? A month? Years passed, but the gas continued to burn, and it was much better for the environment than invisible seepage. This place began to attract tourists and geologists from all over the world. Many scientists wanted to look at the eternal fire to examine it, and some of them did. In 2013, a Canadian researcher came there and found out that no one really knew how that funnel had formed. Local geologists said that the crater had formed in the 60s, but people began to talk about it only in the 1980s. Now it's impossible to find exact information about the origin of the fire pit because it's classified. Why? Good question. If you have the money and desire to go to Turkmenistan to see the Darvaza crater, don't rush to do it. After lots and lots of years, the crater seems to be calming down. But why? Has all the methane run out? Nope. The authorities just stepped in and tried to stop the leak. In simple words, they found a way to turn off the valve. Now, in satellite images, you can see that the fire is almost out. On the one hand, it's sad that now you won't be able to see it with your own eyes. But on the other hand, the number of fires in this region has decreased threefold. Okay, splashes of fire and magma in the middle of hot dunes don't seem strange. What about active volcanoes in the middle of icy plains and endless snow? On the territory of West Antarctica, scientists have discovered 91 volcanoes hidden under a 2.5-mile thick layer of ice. This makes Antarctica home to the world's largest volcanic ridge. All this ice is putting a lot of pressure on volcanoes and possibly holding them from erupting. But as we know, the temperature is rising all over the world, and the ice is melting. If it loses a lot of mass, it can trigger the volcanoes, which will then melt even more ice. This will lead to higher sea levels and many other problems. But let's talk about this in another video.
Now, if you were to check out the Sahara from space right now, instead of a barren wasteland, you'd spot a surprising sight. dry land sprinkled with some lakes and rivers in Morocco and Algeria, all thanks to some heavy rains in early September 2024. These aren't oases. This is just the Sahara going back to the factory settings. Believe it or not, eons ago, one of the biggest deserts on Earth was actually a lush paradise full of greenery. Let's first see how the Sahara turned into a desert. During the last ice age, Earth was much colder, and big ice sheets covered a lot of the land. At that time, the Sahara Desert was significantly bigger than it is today, and on our planet there were fewer tropical forests, and the cooler temperatures changed how rain was distributed in the tropics. Now normally, warm air rises in the tropics, which helps create rain. Since it was colder during the Ice Age, this system got, well, messed up, and less rain fell in some areas. This caused more dry and desert-like conditions in places that are usually wetter. There was also a lot of dust flowing around in the Sahara Desert, which scientists found in old ocean sediments. But about 12,500 years ago, something surprising happened. The dust levels went way down. This meant that the Sahara got a lot wetter, which is a sign that the climate suddenly warmed up for a while before cooling down again. After 12,500 years ago, the Sahara became a much greener place, like a savanna, because a weather pattern called the Intertropical Convergence Zone, a mouthful indeed, moved north during summer. This wet period was at its best around 4,000 years ago, when temperatures were a bit warmer than today. At that time, more rain fell in the Ethiopian highlands, which made the Nile River carry more sediment. However, there was another big change called a Heinrich event, which caused the Intertropical Convergence Zone to move back south. This led to the Sahara and Arabian regions drying out quickly. Because of this, the Nile River had much less flooding between 2700 and 2100 BCE. Long story short, well, too late for that. The Sahara has gone through wet and dry cycles due to changes in the climate and weather patterns over thousands of years. Up until recently, we've known about the Sahara in its dry era. But in September 2024, an unusual cyclone rolled through. It hit Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, and filled those dry lakes and rivers. The satellite images from NASA of before and after the rains are stunning. It's like the Sahara has had a makeover. Some areas in North Africa received up to 8 inches of rain. For comparison, Seattle gets about 40 inches per year, only 5 times what the Sahara received. I say only for one simple reason. Seattle has a reputation for being quite rainy, while the Sahara does not. The tricky part is those 8 inches. Essentially, the entire yearly quota for this area fell in a matter of moments. So, in a way, it might have felt rainier in the Sahara than in Seattle. The mountains funnel the water into ephemeral lakes in northern Algeria, which recently expanded to over 70 square miles and reached depths of more than 7 feet. That's enough water to sustain it for a year. So what exactly are these ephemeral lakes? Well, they're basins that fill up for a short time each year, but might stay dry for several years if the rain doesn't cooperate. Sometimes water flows into them from a small surrounding area, or it can just be good old-fashioned rain. Now, a big question arises. How come these lakes exist in the first place? Well, generally they form because there's excess water trapped on the surface. But the soil in the Sahara is incredibly dry. Shouldn't it act like a sponge? It must be thirsting for moisture. Well, think about how eagerly your potted plant drinks up water when you return home from a vacation. However, no matter how parched it is, dry soil can only absorb a limited amount of water, which is often quite small. And just like your potted plant, it doesn't necessarily drink it all. You might simply be overwatering. Or, if you check the saucer below, you could find a mini flood. Another significant factor preventing the soil from absorbing water is the lack of vegetation. Under normal conditions, trees, shrubs, and various plants help retain moisture. In the desert, however, it's nearly impossible. There may be a few palm trees, but that's about it. This also explains the formation of those temporary lakes. Precipitation that isn't held by plants accumulates in low-lying valleys and depressions, creating these fleeting bodies of water. These lakes may only last for a limited time, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't have names. For instance, the beautiful lake adorned with swaying palms that you see is called Lake Yasmina, located in the oasis town of Merzoga. In certain areas of the desert, where the dunes rise, it may appear as though you're looking at a mirage, but it's not. The sand dunes are partially covered by water. Remember how I mentioned 8 inches? Well, that's not entirely accurate for some regions. In fact, there are places where the flooding is so extensive that the palms are submerged up to their crowns. Now, the last time we saw a downpour this intensive was 30 to 50 years ago. But this rain is more than welcome. After 6 consecutive years of drought, Morocco really needed it. Lakes that had been dry for decades, like Lake Ariki, are finally getting some much-needed water. A recent analysis revealed that out of the hundreds of storms that have hit the region since 2000, only 6 brought enough rain to start filling up this lake. And of those, only 2 resulted in a lake level higher than what we saw in September 2024. So while this torrential rain seems like a blessing, the big question is, will it last? The answer is yes. When humid air from near the equator meets the hot, dry air from the north, the Sahara Desert tends to get more rain. Scientists say this collision zone is shifting further north as the planet warms, and it warms, so it's likely to keep moving that way over the next couple of decades. So I seem a bit overly optimistic about this, and the truth is, the news isn't entirely positive. The reality is that no one was truly prepared for a flood situation like this. Moreover, remember that this isn't some Southeast Asian country where people are accustomed to dealing with water. This is the bone-dry Sahara. That said, I think you know what I'm getting at. Tragically, at least 18 people lost their lives to the intense rains in southern Morocco. The authorities are gearing up for even more heavy rain in the region. But if that's the case, could it mean the Sahara is facing extinction? And what would that even mean for us? It might sound a bit strange, but our planet actually relies on deserts, and the Sahara is no different. At first glance, it may seem like a barren wasteland, and it's nothing to write home about. But deserts play a crucial role in our ecosystem. They act as major carbon storage sites and are considered net carbon sinks, with the Sahara alone holding an estimated 1 trillion metric tons of carbon. In the fight against climate change, these existing deserts are like a buffer, helping to keep the temperatures within acceptable levels. Yeah, deserts are scorching hot, but they act as the world's air conditioning. Plus, desert sands are an unexpected source of nutrients for lush areas like tropical rainforests. Believe it or not, scientists have found that the sand particles from the Sahara have a hand in nurturing the Amazon rainforest. These particles travel across the Atlantic Ocean, riding the winds all the way to South America, where they enrich the soil in the Amazon basin. Without the Sahara, experts believe the Amazon rainforest could face serious collapse. "11,000 years ago, give or take, the most famous desert in the world, the Sahara, was all green and alive, with lakes, rivers, grasslands, and forests. Several thousand years later, it all changed. But then, in 1877, a Scottish businessman, Donald Mackenzie, got the ambitious idea to create a sea right in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Mackenzie thought he could dig a channel from a lagoon near Cape Juby in northwestern Africa south to a large island plain. He thought this area was very low, about 200 feet below sea level. If he flooded it with water from the Atlantic Ocean, he believed it would create a giant inland sea, about the size of 60,000 square miles. His idea was to use the new sea for commercial navigation to West Africa, which had plenty of valuable resources and markets with huge profits. Even though Mackenzie had never visited the Sahara himself, he read about other dry desert areas below sea level, like Tunisia and Egypt, which had salt lakes called chats. But the businessman was wrong about how elevated the plain was and didn't receive enough investment, so he didn't bring his project to life. A French geographer named François L. Roder and a diplomat who developed the Suez Canal came up with a similar idea a year later. Roder was inspired by Greek historian and geographer Herodotus, who mentioned the Bay of Triton in his writings. It's sort of an Atlantis of Africa, as there is no proof it really existed, and no one can tell where exactly it was located. The salt plain could have been the seabed of the Bay of Triton, and they could bring this sea back to life. So the French crew thought they could dig a channel from the Mediterranean Sea into a seasonal salt lake in present-day Tunisia. Water would flow into dry basins and create an inland sea. They were hoping it would be around 3,000 square miles in area and 75 feet deep. It would definitely require a huge amount of water. The new sea was supposed to turn the dry desert into a flourishing garden. The climate in the area would become cooler, and there would be more rainfall in the region. And here comes the best part for the French. They'd replace trade caravans with steamships and generate more profit. The cost of this project would be almost $1 billion in today's money. Some people got worried that this new sea would create swamps full of dangerous bacteria. The French authorities stopped the project when they found out that many areas that would be involved were not below sea level, and the plan was just impossible. Now, some people were also afraid it could tilt the Earth on its axis in a dangerous way, or cool down Europe to the point there would be a new ice age. But the idea lived on, and most recently, Egypt was considering flooding the Qattara Depression in eastern Sahara through a canal or tunnels from the Mediterranean Sea. Water would evaporate quickly because of the desert climate, and a controlled balance of inflow and evaporation would let them generate huge amounts of hydroelectric power. But the project involved using atomic power to carve the new channel, and it didn't come to be. Famous writer Jules Verne described the flooding of the Sahara in his final novel, Invasion of the Sea. In the book, the scientists didn't proceed with their plans to turn the desert into a sea, but an earthquake did the job for them. So if the book comes to life, we might go swimming at a new Sahara sea resort in the future. Another massive flooding project has to do with Lake Erie in Australia. When it fills up completely, it becomes the largest lake on the continent. It happens only a few times a century, and when it does, the lake has the same salinity as seawater. When it dries up, it becomes extra salty. There was an idea to flood Lake Erie with seawater using a big canal or pipeline. It was supposed to make more water evaporate, and it could bring more rain to nearby areas. But when scientists did their math, they saw that the extra rainfall would be very small. It is so tricky because Lake Erie is below sea level, and the area gets really hot, so lots of water evaporates every year. This means salt would build up very quickly, and the canal could get blocked by all the salt. If a big canal sent water to the lake, it could create a small sea, but without removing the salty water, the lake would collect tons of salt every year. In 1930, several British scientists suggested freeing 100,000 square miles of the North Sea from water. Huge dams were supposed to stop the water, and rivers flowing into that sea would be diverted somewhere else through canals. There would be a railroad connecting London to Berlin and a bridge across the English Channel. Antwerp and London would keep their access to the sea, and Rotterdam would lose its busy port. This idea never became a reality, but quite recently, one Dutch and one German scientist came up with a similar project. Their idea is to build a dam that would be 295 miles long between North Scotland and West Norway, and another section between West France and Southwest England. The scientists did some math and figured out that the project would cost somewhere between $276 and $552 billion. Sounds like a lot of money, but it could save around 25 million people living in 14 European countries from high water. So if we spread that budget over 20 years, the cost would be 0.1% of their combined GDP. And although it looks like science fiction, we already have the technology to build something like that. The depth of the North Sea between France and England is hardly over 328 feet and is around 416 feet between Scotland and Norway. We can already build fixed platforms in depth over 1,600 feet, so it should be fine. This project would turn most of the North Sea into a huge freshwater lake with no tides, and it would mean huge changes in its ecosystem. Plus, it would become more expensive to ship goods across this sea. The fishing industry would lose huge amounts of money, and it would also cost a lot to build huge pumps to transfer all of the river water that currently flows into the North Sea to the other side of the dam. So, the best that scientists can do is monitor the situation and hope there won't be a need for such a dam. Meanwhile, a German architect and engineer came up with another huge dam idea in the 1930s. It was supposed to completely change the inside of Africa with giant inland seas. The plan was to build a huge dam on the Congo River where it flows through some deep, narrow valleys after joining with the Kwa River. This would create a massive lake that would be bigger than the states of California, Nevada, and Oregon combined. Once this giant lake filled up, it would overflow into another river, which would then pour into the Sherry River, one of the rivers that feeds Lake Chad. Lake Chad would grow much larger, just like it was believed to be 10,000 years ago. The water would flow from the lake through Algeria and Tunisia right into the Mediterranean Sea. This new river would be big enough for ships to travel. It could replace trains or planes and would make it much easier to move goods and people across Africa. Back then, people didn't think much about how this could hurt nature and focused on how it would help the economy. So, the Sahara Desert is so big that it covers 8% of the world's territory. It's bigger than the USA or China. Surprisingly, the Sahara is not the largest desert in the world. It is the third largest, behind Antarctica and the Arctic. But it is definitely the hottest one. Temperatures there reach 136 degrees Fahrenheit. This place has some of the most incredible sand dunes you've ever seen, towering up to 1,476 feet. But here's the kicker. There's a real risk that these dunes might continue to spread until they cover the entire world. Surprisingly, the influence of the Sahara Desert extends far beyond its borders. Its dust, carried by powerful winds, makes its way to the UK and across the European continent, particularly in winter. This dust, settling on the ground where it rains, is a familiar sight to those in the UK, often leaving a red residue on cars. This connection between the Sahara, England, and Europe serves as a stark reminder of the global reach of environmental phenomena. You might think this is not a big deal, but it could turn Europe into a desert, leaving its soil infertile and Europeans with no food. Soil is a fundamental aspect of human existence, just as crucial as clean water and air. Without it, we're left with nothing but a bleak and barren landscape. The Sahara Desert has already made its jump across the Mediterranean Sea, which is concerning and could change the landscape forever. 1/5 of Spain has already turned into a desert. The next victim is Italy, which also faces the problem of desertification. In fact, almost all European countries have the same issue. According to an expert, the land that has not changed for nearly 2,000 years will become mostly rock, and people living on this land will be gone. 60% of the soil in Moldova is gone, and the problem has expanded beyond the Black Sea. It has reached China and Mongolia, thousands of miles away from the Sahara Desert. All of this causes losses of $4 billion a year. The threat is so significant that even the UN has gathered the necessary resources to solve the problem as soon as possible. Italy is sending help to Africa to stop the Sahara Desert from expanding. If this process does not stop in the next 10 years, millions will be forced to leave their homes. The Sahara Desert is growing for approximately 30 miles per decade. You do the math and see how long it will take to cover Europe. Since 1920, the Sahara has expanded by around 10%. But not all hope is lost because more than 172 countries have joined to put a stop to the desertification of the world. The World Food Program is a project that aims to help bring back green land that was once present in the Sahara. When they told people who called the Sahara home what they were about to do, the latter basically laughed in their faces and said it was impossible. But when you have a specific goal in mind, the impossible becomes possible. If we traveled back around 5,000 years into the past, we would see a beautiful forest with lush green trees and grass. Africa's climate has been changing for 21,000 years, from fantastic greenery to uninhabitable deserts. This has to do with Earth's rotation and the monsoons that bring water to this dry continent. But with the help of scientists and some clever tricks, we can bring the greenery back and stop the Sahara in its tracks. The Senegal River serves as a border between the Sahara Desert, Senegal City, and Mauritania. When you look at this area from space, you'll see how the desert is expanding to Senegal because the vegetation along the riverbank is almost non-existent. Forests can serve as a barrier, stopping the sand from getting blown away and the desert from expanding. An effort to create a great green wall is being made, and how they do it is actually quite impressive. Nothing has been growing in the currently restored area for more than 40 years, making locals find other places to call home. People were thrilled when they saw that the land could be restored. They're very committed and learn to work with the soil and grow food. At the same moment, more than 30,000 hectares have been restored and transformed into lush greenery. The Sahel region is the starting point of desertification, and it is crucial to establish a green wall in that area first. To make this wall is not rocket science, since it only takes a few simple steps. The ground there is baked by the sun and is hard as a block of concrete. If you've ever poured water on concrete, you know that it just flows away. It doesn't stay in one place. So they had to create water-retaining half-moons that would hold the water and make it available to plants. When you learn about how these half-moons work, you might say, how did they not think of that sooner? Actually, this technique is ancient, and it was once implemented in Sahel, but it was lost over time. When the rain falls, the water is collected into the half-moons that are positioned a bit lower than the ground below contour lines. There is also a kind of bank at the end of the shape that prevents water from overflowing, and in the middle, there are plants that are happy because they have plenty of water to thrive. Also, it's essential to grow native plants that are kind of used to harsh conditions, like sorghum and millet. These plants have been surviving there for thousands of years and produce a good amount of biomass, which means the land can be rehabilitated faster and people will have food sooner. The water that will enter the half-moons won't be lost. It will penetrate the ground and top off underground waters. This will ensure the ground that H2O will never run out and that future generations will have usable aqua. This brilliant planting technique is not limited to half-moons. People also create lines and plant various vegetables, such as tomatoes. Next, there are places only for trees, like lemons or oranges. After a long hot day, nothing is better than a freshly made cold lemonade. The trees will also protect the soil, and with some luck, there will be a new forest in the Sahara Desert. The goal is to copy the forest dynamic. Start with small plants and gradually expand to bigger plants that are more useful than the tiny ones. They are aiming to plant more than 10,000 trees. Right now, many people are leaving the Sahara after the rainy season, going to cities or leaving Africa altogether. At this time of year, villages are like ghost towns. Only animals can be found there. Most people are gone. I mean, who would blame them? Nobody wants to live in the sand where nothing grows. Luckily, with all this new, old technology being developed, many people are slowly but surely returning to their land and starting to work in agriculture. The best thing is that there are no brutal winters, so plants grow 12 months a year, and people can always have food. People are becoming more social because now everybody stays in their villages and doesn't travel much. If this project works out, Africa will be saved and the world won't turn into a giant desert.
Africa is ripping itself apart. A giant crack is tearing through the continent and stretching south like a zipper being pulled open. And it's happening faster than anyone expected. Now, scientists think the main trigger might not be buried deep inside Earth, but up in the sky. That's right. What might be speeding up this breakup process is the region's drying climate and brutal droughts. And that feels off, right? Usually tectonic plates move first and the climate changes afterward, but in East Africa, it might be flipped. The climate may actually be helping the plates pull apart faster. But first, let's look at what's really going on there. So, Earth's crust isn't one solid shell. It's made of giant tectonic plates, massive slabs of rock that never stop moving. They grind past each other, collide, slide under, climb over, or stretch apart. This motion is so slow, we don't notice it. But over long periods, those tiny shifts reshape continents, just like what's happening in Africa. For about 30 million years, the Arabian Plate has been moving away from the African Plate. That slow pull split the land. The seawater rushed in to fill the gap, forming the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. And that's not the only breakup happening there. In eastern Africa, the Somali Plate is stretching away from the Nubian Plate. This is opening up the East African Rift Valley, cutting right through places like Ethiopia and Kenya. The region where these plates meet has a name. It's a triple junction. But in this case, they aren't crashing into each other. All three tectonic plates are diverging. When that happens, the crust gets pulled in different directions at once, like fabric being stretched from three corners. It weakens, thins out, and cracks open. They're pulling apart at different speeds too. The Arabian Plate is moving away from Africa at about an inch per year. The two African plates are separating more slowly, roughly between half an inch and 0.2 inches per year. And as they open that gap, hot material from deep inside Earth rises up and hardens, creating brand new seafloor along the split. I know, a few inches per year sounds ridiculously slow, but what makes this event so fascinating is that we're watching it happen in real time. We can actually see Africa slowly breaking apart, and it's terrifying. Back in 2005, a 35-mile long rift that opened up in the Ethiopian desert. The crack is 20 feet wide in some places, which is roughly the size of a shipping container. This is just one example of how active the region really is. From space, satellite images show valleys and rifts slowly widening over time. And down on the ground, people are posting videos of places where the Earth has already split open, leaving big cracks and gaps. Roads, houses, even schools are getting torn apart. The whole area keeps shaking from earthquakes, and the volcanoes are very active. What I mean is, even though this splitting process is super slow, we can actually see it happening. And it's unstoppable. Experts believe this crack in the East African Rift Valley will become a gateway. Waters of the Indian Ocean will eventually invade the valley and fill the growing gap. That will help pull the land apart even more, and eventually it'll create a brand new ocean. And we know that can happen because Earth has done it before. That's exactly how the Atlantic Ocean formed about 180 million years ago, when South America and Africa pulled away from each other. If the East African Rift keeps opening up, parts of Eastern Africa, Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, and a big chunk of Ethiopia could one day break away from the rest of the continent. That means countries like Zambia and Uganda could actually end up with brand new stunning coastlines. But don't pack your swimsuit yet. Unfortunately, none of us will be swimming in the waters of this future sixth ocean anytime soon. Scientists estimate the full split would take about 5 to 10 million years. That's basically forever in human terms. But in Earth terms, it's surprisingly fast, almost like record speed. Now, scientists are trying to figure out why it's happening so fast. I mean, faster than it should. And here's a new intriguing possibility: a drying climate. One of the biggest clues starts right here at Lake Turkana. This lake in Kenya is about 19 miles wide, and it's up to 400 feet deep in some places. But that's nothing compared to more than 5,000 years ago, when the lake level was up to 500 feet higher. Back then, the continent was going through something known as the African Humid Period. It was a time when Africa was wetter than it is today, and the Sahara wasn't a desert at all. It was green, wet, and full of lakes, rivers, and vegetation. But since then, the whole region has shifted into a much drier phase. So researchers took sediment samples from the bottom of Lake Turkana to figure out past water levels and how sediment washed into the lake over time. And while they were doing that, they noticed something else. Those sediment layers preserved lots of tiny faults and even the fingerprints of ancient earthquakes. Wait, wow! That means Lake Turkana might not be a simple lake. It could actually be one huge crack in the earth that eventually filled up with water. In other words, it could be a direct result of this whole rifting process. And now scientists think the same thing might be true for other deep, narrow lakes in the region, like Lake Malawi along the Tanzania-Mozambique border. So, scientists came up with a wild theory. What if these lakes are helping split Africa apart faster? Okay, maybe the theory isn't that wild. After all, water can indeed affect tectonic plates. For example, when glaciers melt and disappear, all that weight is removed, and the land underneath slowly pops back up, kind of like bread rising after you take something heavy off of it. That's called isostatic rebound, and big amounts of water can do the opposite. They press down on the crust, which can also affect things like faults and earthquakes. At Lake Turkana, something interesting shows up in the data. After the African humid period ended, the faults around the lake started moving faster, by about 0.007 inches per year. I know, that's a lot of zeros. But over thousands of years, that extra push can add up. And it could help explain why earthquakes might be more common in the region today than they were around 8,000 years ago. The study then ran computer simulations and found two likely reasons the shaking and fault movement sped up. First, there's less water pushing down on the ground. With that weight gone, the faults can slide more easily, like loosening a vise that was squeezing two pieces of wood together. Second, there's a volcano on an island on the south side of Lake Turkana. Deep underground, it has a pocket of hot, molten rock. When the lake level dropped after the African humid period, the pressure on the earth below eased up, like taking the lid off a pot. That lets the rock underneath melt a bit more. The extra melt flows into the volcano's magma chamber, swelling it up like a balloon. And that extra pressure can jolt nearby faults and trigger more movement. So yeah, drought and falling lake levels could be speeding up the splitting process. But it's not like the climate is creating the rift from scratch. It's more like the ground is already under tension, and the climate is giving it a little extra push. The real reason Africa is breaking apart might be related to something called superplume, an enormous column of scorching hot rock rising from deep inside the earth. Think of it like a balloon underground that's slowly filling up. As it pushes upward, it puts pressure on the crust above it. Over time, that pressure weakens the crust and slowly cracks it apart. And even though none of us will be alive to see the final result of this process, it's still amazing to realize that we're watching a continent split, almost in real time. The Sahara Desert is home to highly dangerous creatures like the death stalker scorpion and the desert horned viper, but they're nothing compared to a mysterious beast that lived there 95 million years ago. Scientists just found a new dinosaur species in the Sahara Desert of Niger. His official name is Spinosaurus mirabilis, and let's just say you wouldn't want to cross paths with him. This beast was as long as a school bus and weighed several tons. He was a massive, powerful predator. His whole body was built to hunt. He used a trap-like jaw to catch the largest fish prehistoric Africa had to offer. His bottom teeth actually poked outward, fitting perfectly between his top teeth to create a tight grip. Once those jaws closed and trapped fish, they couldn't get away. His name, mirabilis, actually means astonishing in Latin. And that's because this dinosaur was a showstopper. He had a really flashy, weird feature. A tall, I mean really tall, crest on his head. It was so big, the researchers actually had to go back to the site and gather more pieces just to make sense of it. Today, it's all just bones, but the team thinks that when he was alive, that crest was brightly colored. It curved up toward the sky like a glowing blade. And being that flashy had one main goal: to attract mates. It worked just like peacocks with their long, bright tails. It's all about showing off for their love interests. At least, that's what researchers think. This discovery is huge because it's only the second Spinosaurus species we've ever found, like the one that starred in Jurassic Park 3. These guys were among the biggest terrestrial carnivores of the late Cretaceous period. That is, meat-eating dinosaurs that lived about 100 to 66 million years ago. They were as huge and fierce as the famous T-Rex. For a long time, most people thought Spinosaurus were aquatic hunters, and we pictured this fierce monster stalking the shore or diving deep to hunt. Some research even suggests their long spines on the tail were basically built-in flippers. But that's not what most scientists believe anymore. New studies show that while the paddle-like tail looks great for swimming, it didn't actually have much muscle. It turns out those tails were likely just for show, kind of like a lizard tail. They just didn't have the power to push such a massive creature through the water. The density of their bones didn't help either. The bottom line is, they wouldn't have been terrible swimmers. They were super slow and couldn't really dive. To give you an idea, if we put this dinosaur next to a crocodile in a pool for a swimming competition, the crocodile would win every single time. Whether they were swimmers or not, scientists seem to agree on one thing: these guys loved the sea. Most of their fossils were found along the North African coast, but then the Mirabilis species showed up and totally changed the game. These were found in the Sahara, where there isn't a drop of water in sight today. Back then, this spot was about 300 to 600 miles away from the nearest ocean. So what's the story here? Is this actually a Spinosaurus? Well, it sure is. And the way scientists actually tracked it down in the middle of the desert is pretty interesting. Because for over 70 years, the main clue was right there. Easy to find, but everyone missed it. Back in the 1950s, some French geologists were out in the desert looking for uranium. While they were searching, they stumbled upon these massive bones poking out of the sand at a place called Gadufawa. Nearby at another spot called Acarazeras, a geologist named Hugues Faure found a different fossil site. He found teeth that looked a lot like the ones from a Carcharodontosaurus, which was a massive carnivorous dinosaur. He wrote down one single line about it in his notes, and that was basically it. For some reason that nobody can explain, those notes just sat there. No one took them seriously or even bothered to go back to that site for decades. It wasn't until 2019 that a team led by Paul Sereno from the University of Chicago decided to finally follow that old lead. They basically turned it into a high-stakes treasure hunt. They headed out there, and a local Tuareg man led Sereno's team on motorbikes deep into the Sahara. He took them to a site called Jengwebe, where he remembered seeing fossilized bones a long time ago. Because it was such a long trek back to their main camp, the team didn't have much time. They could only grab a few fossils, mostly teeth and pieces of jawbones, before they had to leave. At that moment, they had no idea they were holding a brand new species in their hands. The team finally headed back there in 2022, and this time, they found even more fossils. That's when they finally put together the 40-foot-long find. And then they were able to confirm three big things. First, this new creature had a really tall and unusual crest on its head. Second, the way the teeth were set was a bit different from its famous relatives. And then we come to the biggest difference of all. For the first time ever, we're seeing a Spinosaurus that lived far from the ocean. But that raises a big question. How did it eat fish? Scientists have a theory. All those bones were found buried in the sediments of an ancient river. That means this dinosaur probably hunted for fish in shallow water. It was big and strong enough to wade into water over 6 feet deep, but it probably spent most of its time in shallow water, just waiting for a big fish to swim by. But if it didn't feel like sushi dinner, it could just wander through the woods and pluck something else to eat. Okay, so you're probably a little confused right now. I'm talking about forests and rivers. But wasn't this thing found in the middle of a desert? Well, the thing is, the Sahara looked completely different back then. It was actually green. The whole landscape was full of rivers and forests while these dinosaurs were roaming around. So that pretty much solves that mystery. But there are still plenty of other questions about this species, like how big they actually were. See, the problem is that the bones we found belonged to a young dinosaur, not a full-grown adult. Estimates say that the creature was probably about 26 feet long when he lost his life, but he could have grown a whole lot bigger than that. That leads us to the second mystery. Because this dinosaur was so huge and looked so unique, scientists have been arguing for years about how much time it actually spent in the water. One theory is that they went through 3 big evolutionary phases. First, way back in the Jurassic period, they started developing these long, crocodile-like snouts. They were perfect for catching fish. Second, during the early Cretaceous, they really started running the show. They moved toward the sea and became the top predators along the ancient coastlines. The final phase happened right as the Atlantic Ocean was opening up. This is when they reached their record-breaking size. They basically became shallow water ambush specialists, sticking mostly to North Africa and South America. But their reign didn't last forever. Around 95 million years ago, there were abrupt changes in the climate and the sea levels increased a lot. Basically, that affected the habitat they lived in, pushing them to the brink. Eventually, their story came to an end. Unfortunately, these new fossils are only part of the puzzle. We still don't know the whole story about Spinosaurus. There might even be other species out there just waiting to be discovered. And to really understand these mysterious giants, we'll have to wait until we find more complete skeletons out in the field.
Hey, welcome to the Dino New Year's Party. Hey, everyone you know well is here. Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, Stegosaurus, Raptor, Diplodocus. But there will also be someone new, a guest who will surprise you. You see, paleontologists have discovered a new dinosaur species that was somewhat like the T-Rex, but with a twist. These guys would rather eat a crunchy salad than a juicy steak. Hey, meet this dude. Any guesses on how to pronounce this? Duonicus sakubatre. Thanks, please hold your applause. These are herbivorous guys that belong to the therizinosaurs. But they had one awesome feature. A feature that showed scientists that Duonicus belonged to a new branch of dinosaur evolution, about which little is known. But hey, let's go back to the dino party, shall we? Here you can see dinosaurs with different personalities. The T-Rex is a bully and toothy. The Velociraptor seems to be very toxic and moody. The Triceratops or Stegosaurus are aggressive but silent. You know, like those guys that don't touch anyone, but it's better not to mess with them. So among them all, the Therizinosaurus is a chill guy that will always help, will always keep you company at a party, and will never be annoying. Therizinosaurs lived in what is now Asia and North America during the late Cretaceous period, about 100 to 66 million years ago. Their anatomical features made them look more like predators, like the T-Rex. But Therizinosaurs were herbivores, with large crescent-shaped claws. In some species, they reached up to 20 inches. Now imagine how dangerous these monsters would have been had they been carnivorous. But they used their claws to grab tree branches and eat leaves. The Duonicus was quite large, just under 10 feet in length. A hippo was about the same size, and their weight was about 600 pounds, which is almost half the size of a horse. Therizinosaurs had a long mouth, a bit like a duck's nose, and long front paws with 3 thumbs. But the Duonicus, that has been found recently, was unique because it only had 2 fingers on each hand. The 2-fingered dinosaur discovery has sparked joy among paleontologists. Okay, 2 fingers instead of 3, whatever, you might think. But it makes a big difference. It shows how dinosaurs evolved. The latest paleontology news reports that the discovery was made in Mongolia. It was the largest preserved claw in history. Its size was about 11 inches, and it had a curved shape. That means it was like a giant banana. The coolest thing was that the claw was covered with keratin. Our nails are made from this material too. Can you imagine? Large lizards that lived tens of millions of years ago had claws with the same composition as our nails. Nature is amazing, isn't it? Do you know this crazy theory that the T-Rex evolved into a chicken and the Velociraptor into an ostrich? There must have been tons of evolutionary changes. But the two-fingered dinosaur discovery offers us a more understandable and more detailed explanation of how dinosaurs evolved. Therizinosaurs had 3 clawed fingers on each paw, but why did nature get rid of one of them? Scientists believe that it was practical. It's possible that a paw with 2 fingers was much stronger and more flexible than a paw with 3. This way, dinosaurs could grab vegetation and branches, like chameleons do. Scientists have also suggested that the 2-fingered long paw helped the dinosaur defend itself, care for its mates, and even play. It's hard to imagine what they could be playing at. Maybe they did high fives or high twos. It would be cool if they had used those paw pliers not only for taking food, but for fighting off predators. And speaking of predators, the T-Rex had a similar front paw structure, but its small paws were useless. It would be cool if the Deinonychus could box with them or climb trees. Yes, it was an herbivore, but that doesn't mean that other bad dinosaurs could bully it. Let's just think that the Deinonychus was kind of weak and formidable to the strong. That's why it would be the most welcome guest at the dinosaur party. But the strangest guest at this party would be the Deinonychus, named Terrible Hands. The case of the Deinonychus shows how dinosaurs evolved from having 3-fingered paws to being 2-fingered. The Deinonychus shows that ancient lizards could evolve into a horse or something else. It sounds weird, but let's get to know this guy better. In 1965, the arms, hands, and shoulder girdle of an unknown dinosaur was discovered in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. When paleontologists put the bones together, they got 2 long, creepy arms. For many years, those arms remained in the museum without a body. It looked funny and a little scary. Each arm was about 8 feet long. This is more than the tallest basketball players. Paleontologists were trying to find other dinosaur body parts in the Gobi Desert, but their attempts were unsuccessful. The Deinonychus became one of the most famous mysteries in paleontology. How big was the owner of such arms? What did it eat? How did it live? This remained unknown until 2014. According to the latest paleontology news about this lizard, a group of scientists from the Korea Institute of Geoscience and Mineral Resources has discovered other well-preserved remains of the Deinonychus. With their help, paleontologists have managed to recreate the lizard's appearance. And that breakthrough has turned out to be much cooler than the 2-fingered dinosaur discovery. Are you ready? The Deinonychus was colossal, rather slow, with a horse-like head and a spine that formed something like a hump. It looks super weird, even for a science fiction movie. This new dinosaur species belonged to Ornithomimosauria, an ostrich-like species, agile and fast-moving. But not the Deinonychus. Instead of speed and agility, the dinosaur had a large size. It was 36 feet long and weighed 13,200 pounds, which is almost the weight of an adult elephant and the length of half a metro wagon. Despite its size, the Deinonychus was quite harmless. Its long muzzle looked like that of a duck or a horse. It also had no teeth. So, for tyrannosaurs and other predatory giants, it was an easy lunch. And this is not just a guess. Scientists found bite marks on the discovered skeletons of this dinosaur. Seems this poor big dude met some really bad and hungry guys. But what was lunch to this strange lizard itself? It ate almost everything: soft plants, algae, small vertebrates, and fish. It sucked food from the bottom of lakes and rivers with its beak and tongue and swallowed stones to help grind the food. Those stones crush the pieces of food and thus help the stomach to digest stuff more easily. The dinosaur used its terrible hands to dig and pick up food from trees and the ground. But the strangest part of its body was its back and tail. The bones at the end of its tail were joined into a single structure called a pygostyle. This thing supports the feathers of modern birds. Now, it's possible that the Dinochirus waved its tail like a fan, and its back had thick bone spikes that stuck up from its spine. Considering that those bones were covered with skin, the whole strange skeleton structure looked like a sail. You know how dinosaurs evolved to have such a strange shape and probably ask yourself, hey, what's the point? Well, scientists believe that the ligaments coming out of the spine help support the dinosaur's heavy belly and legs. To better understand how that could work, imagine cable-stayed bridges. Long vertical beams have many cables that hold the roadway. Similar, the Dinochirus spikes and ligaments help to hold the dinosaur's weight. Now, back at our dino party, it would be a shy, tall dude who accidentally drops a drinking glass and makes you feel awkward. It's lonely. It dreams of finding friends. And it will surely find them. A Diplodocus would make a great buddy. A herbivorous dinosaur with 2 fingers that looks like a predator and a horse-like giant with 2 long arms show us how diverse dinosaur evolution can be. T-Rex, Velociraptor, Diplodocus, and others are the superstars of the ancient world. It would be cool if paleontologists could discover new dinosaur species that would remove the old guard from their pedestal of fame. Would you like to see a movie starring the Dinochirus and the Duonicus? Hey, I would. Ooh, from giant spiders to venomous snakes, we all get freaked out by Australian creatures. Yeah, me too. But newly discovered fossils show that things were way more dangerous 120 million years ago, when this land was completely ruled by massive razor-clawed megaraptors. Yeah, I'm glad I wasn't around then. These dinosaurs were about 26 feet long and walked on 2 legs, just like the famous T-Rex. They were fast, fierce hunters, with a superpower: their hug. Yep, their massive, muscular forearms had huge curved claws, perfect for grabbing and holding onto prey. Uh-oh. They would wrap their arms around their poor victims, just like a hug, and trap them with no chance of escape. And even though their teeth were quite small, they were still sharp enough to rip through flesh. The first time we heard about megaraptors was in the late 90s, when a paleontologist discovered their fossils in the region of Patagonia, Argentina. Since then, no one has ever found a complete skeleton, only fragments. But probably the most important one yet was uncovered in Australia at the beginning of this year. Researchers were exploring Victoria's stunning coastline when they stumbled upon megaraptor fossils. First, they spotted bones from its lower legs and a few vertebrae washed up on the beach. Even though they were working with just a couple of fragments, a deeper analysis confirmed that these belonged to a megaraptor. And not just any megaraptor, it was the oldest one ever discovered. This discovery gets even more exciting because it adds weight to the theory that these dinosaurs might have originated in Australia. But we already knew that they roamed the land down under since early 2023, when researchers found the top of a megaraptor skull in the country. So let's rewind a bit. We first found their remains in Argentina, right? Right. But then, years later, researchers found fossils of the same family of dinosaurs on the other side of the world, in Australia. If the ones in Oceania were older, how did these creatures end up in South America? Of course, they didn't fly there. They didn't cross continents by swimming either, although there is a theory that they could swim. Remember, we're talking about the dinosaur era, which happened millions of years ago. And back then, Australia and Argentina were actually pretty close. Basically, they were one. Both lands were part of the supercontinent known as Gondwana, and they were connected through Antarctica. Wait, but wasn't this path freezing? I mean, yeah, these dinos had to pass through Antarctica to get to their destination, but they weren't freezing their tails off. This all happened during the mid-Cretaceous period, when the weather was super warm. Back then, the poles were covered in plants, not ice. So let's just say they took full advantage of the good weather to make the crossing. Now, about 180 million years ago, Gondwana started to break apart. At some point, Australia drifted away from the supercontinent, cutting it off from other landmasses, including South America. That's why the same dinosaurs showed up in completely different parts of the world. Mystery solved. Now, let's get back to that recent discovery. The researchers didn't just find a few traces of megaraptors on the beach. In total, they uncovered 250 dinosaur bones at the site, but only 5 of them were really important. They belonged to 3 different species of dinosaurs that, as it turns out, all lived in Victoria at the same time. So yeah, we've already talked about those first 2 bones. They were from the megaraptor. Next, we have a shin bone from a unenlagiine. That's my best shot at pronouncing it. It's a dino also known as the southern raptor. This is a type of dromaeosaur with a long snout. And the last 2 shin bones of different sizes came from a Carcharodontosaurus, whose name means shark-toothed lizard. This one is a particularly big deal for 2 reasons. Number 1, it's the first evidence that this species lived in Australia. And number 2, it was small, and that is pretty surprising since we've always thought of this species as being massive. Fossils found in Argentina, for example, show this dinosaur reached a length of about 36 feet. But the one in Australia was much smaller, measuring only around 6 to 10 feet long. And that's still plenty big. Basically, what we're saying is that the way predators were ranked in these 2 parts of the world was completely different. In South America, Carcharodontosaurs grew to massive T-Rex-sized giants, towering over megaraptors and dominating the landscape. But in Australia, it was the complete opposite. There, huge, powerful megaraptorids roamed the land alongside smaller Carcharodontosaurs. So the predator dynamic was different. And all of this just shows how unique the ecosystem in Victoria was back then. Although isolated dinosaur bones have been found in Western and South Australia, most of the fossils come from the eastern part of the country, like Queensland. And there, researchers dug up something really, really rare: a well-preserved dinosaur skull. The study shows that this bone belonged to the 4th discovered specimen of Titanosaur. This group includes those massive long-necked dinosaurs. They look like the Brachiosaurus, but some of them were even bigger, reaching 120 feet long. The skull, discovered in 2018, belongs to this guy, whose pronunciation is above my pay grade, and the research points out that it roamed the Earth around 98 million years ago. Thanks to this find, scientists were able to recreate, for the very first time, what its face might have looked like. Probably after checking out the illustration, they thought, hey, it looks a lot like its cousin. They were talking about another species of Titanosaur, this other unpronounceable guy. And guess where they used to live? Yep, in Argentina. So, this research also supports the theory that dinosaurs crossed between South America and Australia during the mid-Cretaceous period. Now, this wasn't the only secret buried in Queensland, though. In 2024, researchers working there discovered the fossilized remains of a new species of pterosaur, about 100 million years old. These creatures were the first vertebrates that could actually fly, existing alongside dinosaurs. They were massive, powerful predators, with wingspans of up to 36 feet. But these remains belong to a new species within the pterosaur group, which they have named Hakuna Matata, or something similar. Compared to their cousins, they were on the smaller side, with a wingspan of about 15 feet. Still, that's bigger than a snowy albatross, the largest flying bird we have today. This species of pterosaurs were terrifying beasts, flying over the ocean to hunt for prey. Once they spotted their victim, they'd snap open their 60-centimeter jaws, filled with sharp spike-like teeth, and, well, I guess there was no escaping that. The last incredible discovery we're talking about today also comes from Queensland. For over 20 years, students walked past a plain-looking rock at Biloela State High School completely unaware that it held 66 dinosaur footprints, and they date back about 200 million years. These prints were made by a group of these Latin-named guys. They were small dinosaurs with 3 toes on each foot, And it seems like they were all over Queensland around that early Jurassic period. The rock they found at the school worked like a snapshot, giving us a better idea of what these dinosaurs were like and how they behaved. After taking a closer look, researchers found that the footprints came from 47 individual dinosaurs. This group was probably walking along or maybe crossing a waterway when their footprints got marked in the white clay. And the study also discovered that they were likely moving at less than 4 miles per hour at the time. So we only discovered those marks in Australia. But fossils of the same species found in other countries showed that they had these long legs, a big chunky body, short arms, and this tiny head with a beak. But honestly, they don't sound as scary when you realize they only ate plants. Whew.
The ocean had a king 190 million years ago, and that creature was just the size of a dolphin. But it still kept everyone else in fear. A fossil collector found its relics in the rock at England's famous Jurassic Coast near a place called Golden Cap in Dorset back in 2001. For centuries before that day, people just walked over it and never noticed this treasure. Then, it traveled all the way to a museum in Ontario, Canada. But it was still there until, in late 2025, scientists realized they weren't looking at just another sea reptile, but at something unique, the only known specimen of its species. The find received a nickname, the Sword Dragon of Dorset, and got the attention of the scientific world. Ichthyosaurus, the group this animal belongs to, spent their lives in the ocean, but they don't have much in common with fish. Think of them as the marine equivalent of dinosaurs' cousins. For millions of years, they ruled the seas the way sharks and whales dominate today. But the sword dragon didn't have much in common with those bad guys. This creature stretched just about 10 feet long and had a pretty unusual appearance. Many ichthyosaurs had thick skulls and strong jaws, which were just perfect for crushing prey. Instead, evolution gave our guy an incredibly long, narrow snout attached to a high-speed body. Researchers think it used that snout to slash through schools of fish and squid and to stun or slice prey before swallowing it. And the eyes of our sword dragon worked like giant camera lenses. They pulled in every bit of light available, so the animal could see in places where most predators would be almost blind. And in the ocean, where sunlight doesn't travel very far underwater, it's a huge advantage. Fish, squid, and other prey drifted through the gloom, thinking they had some cover from danger, and our dragon could spot them without a problem. It also had a pretty unusual skull. Most animals, including us humans, have a small bone near the nostril area called the lacrimal bone. Normally, it's nothing special. But on the sword dragon, it had odd little prong-like projections sticking out from it, something paleontologists had never seen on any other ichthyosaur before. In paleontology, those tiny details are everything. They become clues that tell scientists they're not looking at a completely new species that lived millions of years ago. The sword dragon skeleton survived in almost perfect shape and preserved its three-dimensional form, not flattened like many other fossils. Scientists even think traces of the creature's last meal still sit inside its remains. So, one moment this animal hunted fish in Jurassic waters, and the next moment it froze in time, with its final lunch locked inside stone for 190 million years. The story got even more interesting once scientists began studying the bones carefully. Some limb bones and teeth have strange deformities, which means the animal suffered injuries or disease while it lived. The skull also has bite marks from a much larger predator, probably another ichthyosaur. That beast likely delivered the final blow. But the biggest reason scientists care about this animal so much is that it fills a massive gap in the fossil record. Fossils from the time period when it lived, around 193 to 184 million years ago, show up very rarely. Before this discovery, paleontologists saw two completely different groups of ichthyosaurs in the fossil record. Older ones before this period, and newer ones after it. But no one knew exactly when or how that change happened. So, the sword dragon enters the story like a missing puzzle piece. This creature looked more closely related to later species that appeared millions of years afterward. That means the big evolutionary shift in ichthyosaurs likely started earlier than scientists thought. Now, let's leave the ocean and jump to a completely different landscape. One that once baked under the brutal sun of the Sahara. Around 95 million years ago, a predator walked there that looked just as strange as the sword dragon, but it chased prey on land and in rivers instead of the sea. The scientist who led the discovery described this animal as a hell heron. It stretched as long as a school bus and weighed several tons. Its skull had long crocodile-like jaws filled with conical teeth, so it could easily grip slippery fish for lunch. But the really weird part was a crest on its head shaped like a curved blade, a scimitar. It looked so unusual that scientists didn't even recognize the species when they first uncovered the bones in 2019. They only understood what they had after they returned to the site in 2022 and collected more fossils. Researchers find spinosaurs in rocks that formed near ancient coastlines, which clearly shows us that those creatures took their food from the sea. But this one turned up hundreds of miles from any prehistoric sea. The land around it once had forests and rivers instead of desert dunes. That means this giant predator probably went into freshwater ecosystems to look for food there, instead of coastal waters. So it looks like this massive dinosaur was wading through water up to 6.5 feet deep, standing on sturdy legs while scanning the surface for fish. Instead of diving like a crocodile, it likely waited patiently and then snapped its jaws shut in a lightning-fast strike. More than 200 million years ago, another strange survivor swam through freshwater lakes and slow-moving rivers in what is now Zimbabwe, an extinct species of lungfish. Unlike most fish, lungfish can actually breathe air. They have organs that function like primitive lungs, which allows them to gulp oxygen directly from the atmosphere when water becomes too stagnant or low in oxygen. In a way, they live between two worlds, part fish, part early experiment in the transition toward land animals. And that superpower makes lungfish really important to scientists. They are the closest living relatives to the ancient ancestors of all four-limbed animals. There used to be a gap in our knowledge of these creatures, but the new discovery helped fill it. Now we know that many lungfish may be more closely related than they used to think, and scientists can now better understand how these creatures survived for hundreds of millions of years. In a way, lungfish are one of evolution's masterpieces. This ancient blueprint kept working when entire worlds of species were born and vanished around them. Now let's travel even further back in time, way before dinosaurs ruled the planet. Around 275 million years ago, another bizarre creature swam through freshwater lakes in what is now Brazil. Researchers discovered the species from 9 fossilized lower jaws, each about 6 inches long. Instead of pointing upward like normal teeth, this creature's teeth stuck out sideways. Every single jaw had the same strange design, which proved the twist wasn't a mistake, but the way the animal evolved. The inside surface of the jaw had tiny tooth-like bumps called denticles. These structures formed a grinding surface, so the creature had its own built-in food processor. Scientists think it used that unusual mouth to chew small invertebrates, or maybe even plant material. That's a pretty unusual diet for an animal whose close relatives were mostly carnivores. And speaking of its family, this bizarre creature belonged to an extremely ancient lineage called stem tetrapods. Those were early four-limbed vertebrates that gave rise to modern reptiles, birds, mammals, and amphibians. By the time Tankia lived, most of those early lineages had already disappeared. Yet this one somehow survived, and newer, more modern animals evolved around it. Scientists call this kind of animal a living fossil. When researchers analyzed the fossils, they made the conclusion that this mysterious creature grew up to about 3 feet long and probably resembled a salamander with a longer snout. It swam through lakes in a world where the continents still formed the giant supercontinent Gondwana. This discovery is also important because it helps scientists understand how ancient ecosystems functioned and which animals filled different roles in those early communities.
Now, this bad boy was the size of a husky and could maybe pass for one, except it didn't have any fur and was a top predator with extra long, blade-like canine teeth. Ooh, charming. Meet the earliest known saber-toothed animal to have ever lived. It roamed the Earth well before the dinosaurs. Scientists made the description of this creature based on its fossils found on the Spanish island of Majorca in the Mediterranean Sea. About 200 million years ago, none of us were around then, the very first true mammals appeared, and they lived right alongside the dinosaurs. But if we trace the family tree of mammals even further back, we'll find an ancient group called Therapsids. They didn't look like mammals we have today, but they had some key features that would eventually help define mammals. For example, Therapsids had special openings on the sides of their skulls for jaw muscles, and parts of their jaw bones would later evolve into the tiny middle ear bones that all mammals, including you, have today. So, the new discovery is what might be the oldest known Therapsid fossil. The fossil, which doesn't have an official species name yet, belongs to a group called Gorgonopsians. Those guys are more closely related to mammals than they are to any other living animals. Some of them were as small as cats, and others were as massive as polar bears. Gorgonopsians had some very mammal-like traits, like different types of teeth for different jobs. But unlike mammals, these ancient predators kept replacing their teeth, even their giant saber-like canines, over and over during their lives. Hey, that would be handy. Until now, the oldest Gorgonopsian fossils we knew about were around 265 million years old. But this new fossil is even older, dating back between 270 and 280 million years. The find was super detailed and complete, including its sharp knife-like fangs, part of its jaw, pieces of its spine, ribs, tailbones, and toe bones, plus most of one of its back legs. Even though the creature's skull wasn't complete, the scientists think it was about 7 inches long, and the animal itself would have been around the size of a medium-large dog, weighing between 66 and 88 pounds. But other than that, it didn't really look much like a dog. Even though it had some lizard-like features, calling it a lizard dog is totally wrong. Mammals and reptiles do share a super ancient ancestor from about 320 million years ago, but their evolutionary paths split a long time ago. When the newly found creature was alive, the island of Majorca was right in the middle of the gigantic supercontinent Pangaea. Back then, this area went through super wet and super dry seasons. Scientists have always wondered if major moments in mammal history happened in tropical places like this, but we just didn't have the right fossils to prove it. Now, with the discovery of the oldest known Gorgonopsian in Majorca, the missing pieces of the puzzle are coming together. It looks like some huge steps in mammal evolution could have happened in low-latitude environments we haven't explored much yet. The so-called gap in the fossil record might just be because paleontologists weren't looking in the right spots. Our hero of the day wasn't the only cool guy rocking the planet before dinos settled in. Over 500 million years ago, the weirdest predators to have ever existed ruled the oceans. The name is a bit tricky to pronounce, so I'm not going to. Okay, it's Anomalocaris, but it just literally means unusual shrimp. This creature looked nothing like anything alive today. Scientists think it was the first true apex predator, the orca of its time. Anomalocaris was massive for its era, as it grew up to 3 feet from its sharp grabbing arms to the tips of its tail fins. For a while, everyone thought trilobites were its go-to meal, but new research shows it wasn't strong enough to crack open trilobite armor. So instead, it was a speedy, agile hunter with awesome vision, and it often picked off soft-body animals that zipped through the open water. Now, another really cool creature from pre-dino times is a fish that could walk on land. Tiktaalik lived in marshy rivers that looked a lot like today's Amazon rainforest. It could grow up to 9 feet long, and it found its prey in rivers and inlets like a modern-day freshwater crocodile. It had a flexible neck and even some early versions of lungs, and thanks to them, it could survive both in water and out of it. Why fish like Tiktaalik started moving toward land about 395 million years ago is still a bit of a mystery. Around that time, the ancient supercontinent called Gondwana was drifting closer to the land that would become North America. This slow movement created lots of shallow, swampy habitats, which were perfect places for crocodile-like animals to thrive. Plus, these areas were near the equator, so they were warm and tropical. But there wasn't a lot of food waiting for them on land, so maybe they moved there for safety reasons. There were fewer predators and better spots to lay eggs there compared to the water. Creatures first adapted to living in open water, then shallow water, then marshes and river edges, and only after a long, slow transition did they finally step fully onto land. Now, how about a millipede the size of a small car and weighing as much as a large dog? This beauty lived over 300 million years ago in what is now England. Back then, during the Carboniferous period, Earth's atmosphere had way more oxygen, over 26%, compared to today's 21%. Scientists used to think the high oxygen levels were the only reason these creatures could get so big. But back then, they found a new fossil from a time when oxygen wasn't that much higher than today. They discovered it purely by accident, when a boulder split just right and revealed one of the most complete and largest giant millipede specimens ever. This one could have lived not just in swampy areas, but also in open woodlands filled with tasty seeds, nuts, and maybe even small animals. There's a chance that this beast wasn't a slow, plant-munching crawler, but a predator that would snap up whatever it could find. After dominating the Earth for about 45 million years, the giant millipedes eventually vanished. Probably the reptiles pushed them out, clearing the way for the age of the dinosaurs. Now, in case you ever wondered what would happen if you crossed a polar bear with a saber-toothed cat, here's the answer. This guy ruled the southern ecosystems after migrating 7,000 miles across the supercontinent Pangaea around 252 million years ago. It had a tough skin like a rhino's and massive canines, perfect for tearing away huge chunks of meat, and it was an excellent runner. Once it got to its new home, in what is now South Africa, it replaced a whole group of local predators. But its glory didn't last long, as closer to the end of the Permian period, massive volcanic eruptions made the weather patterns change and wiped out about 90% of all species. And because top predators are usually big, slow to grow, and not super common, they often vanish among the first when massive extinction events hit. And that's how our guy here went extinct. Our final creature of the day was a dragonfly that lived around 300 million years ago and had a wingspan of over 2 feet, 6 long, spiny legs, and huge, bulging eyes. Megangura. This 4-winged giant is most likely the largest flying insect that ever lived, and it easily outsizes today's dragonflies, which are its distant relatives. Like modern dragonflies, Megangura like to hang out in open areas near ponds and slow-moving streams. But unlike today's dragonflies, it wasn't just catching tiny bugs. This guy was likely the top predator in these open spaces. It used the spines on its legs like a flying trap to snatch prey out of the air, including other flying insects, small amphibians, and even lizard-like creatures. Scientists found the first fossils of Megangura in 1880 in the coal-rich rocks in France. The fossils were incredibly well preserved and showed off the detailed vein patterns in their wings. Scientists think Megangura grew so huge because it didn't have much competition from vertebrates, and the air back then, during the Carboniferous period, had a lot more oxygen than it does today. So yeah, a giant asteroid fell to Earth and destroyed all dinosaurs with a blast wave. That's what we've all heard. It was a terrible disaster, but it was actually much worse. You can't even imagine how unfortunate it was for dinosaurs and what kind of disaster they faced. It wasn't just a piece of solid rock from space, but a lump of molten clay. It provoked not just a tsunami, but giant mud waves. It filled the atmosphere, not only with a burnt smell, but also with an acidic and foul smell of rotten eggs. It didn't just sweep everything away with a blast wave. It provoked a volcanic winter, poisoned the air, and blocked the sun. And do you know what the most unfortunate thing was? If the angle of the fall had been just a little bit different, or if it had fallen a little further away, then there might not have been any global catastrophe. That asteroid, the size of Mount Everest, fell in the coastal part of the Yucatan Peninsula. This place separates the Gulf of Mexico from the Caribbean Sea. The asteroid touched both solid rock and water and immediately triggered strong tsunamis and mega ripples. These are large sand waves that are normally about 3 feet long on average and leave a pattern similar to dunes on the seabed. Oh, by the way, they're really called subaqueous dunes. So when the meteorite fell, it formed 52-foot-high mega ripples. Can you imagine? Giant waves of sea mud that are almost as high as a 5-story building. But how did the scientists figure it out? They used 3D seismic data and modeled the mega ripples pattern in the program. The data was based on the landscape of the bottom, which was impacted 66 million years ago. First, a powerful strike triggered a strong earthquake that liquefied the seabed layer, and then a high-grade tsunami triggered those mega ripples. That is, while giant waves on the surface flooded the land and went into open waters, large mud waves destroyed the seabed. Ancient fish, dinosaurs, and other underwater creatures didn't stand a chance. But what does this information tell us? Well, first, studying the effects of ancient tsunamis helps to reconstruct the past of our planet. Secondly, it helps us to be prepared if something like this happens in the future. Predicting a scenario like this could save countless lives in case of danger. Okay, there was a total mess in the water at the time of impact. But what was happening on land was much worse and scarier. But let's discuss the meteorite itself first and what it consisted of. The scientists analyzed the rocks at the impact site and saw traces of carbonaceous chondrites. This is the rock that makes up most of the meteorites in space. Often this rock contains water, clay, and organic compounds with carbon. It means that, in a sense, a lump of dirt the size of the highest mountain on the planet fell on Earth. And yes, carbonaceous chondrites often have an unusual smell of rotten eggs, tar, or wet hay. So it wasn't just very loud, but it also probably smelled bad. It was a fetid rocket on a planetary scale. However, at the time of the fall, not a single living creature was there to sniff it. All of them lost their lives in the first seconds of the disaster, hit by the devastating blast wave. It set a chain of events that later wiped out all the dinosaurs from the face of the Earth. The peninsula where the meteorite fell turned into a large crater in an instant. Thousands of tons of soot and ash were released into the air. A huge area was filled with thick smoke. The sky turned gray. Black clouds obscured the sun. But wait, where did the ashes come from? The crash site contained huge reserves of flammable materials. In simple words, the meteorite fell into a giant barrel of fuel which started to burn. The sky remained dark. Grass, plants, trees, and bacteria couldn't get enough sunlight. The green world began to wither. And this affected not only the impact site, but almost the entire continent. Even dinosaurs, living far away, felt the low temperatures and lack of ultraviolet light. Dinosaurs couldn't survive in such conditions. The environment was changing too fast. Then it got even worse. A firestorm was spreading in all directions from the place where the meteorite had fallen. The air inside the storm was poisonous and dangerous to inhale. And you know why? Because the meteorite fell in a coastal area and destroyed the seabed. And under that seabed, there were large reserves of sulfur. This toxic mass rose into the air, mixed with ash, soot, red-hot pieces of rock, and meteorite particles. Then the winds picked up this cloud and began to spread it across the continent. The rainforests that survived the blast waves were still in danger, as the hot toxic cloud rained down red-hot ash upon them. This caused large-scale fires. The smoke from the burning trees rose and became part of the destructive cloud. The more trees burned, the larger and thicker the poisonous ash cloud grew. What could have stopped this catastrophe? Rain clouds filled with water, right? Good point, but they didn't. When the hot ash and sulfur fumes mixed with water, they created acid rain, a downpour of poisonous, corrosive mud that wiped out all life around it. Fires, firestorm, acid rain, sun blockage – how could dinosaurs survive after that? Where could they escape? Perhaps the ocean shore? Bad idea. Yeah, the water could have protected them from the fire and ashes, but there was another problem. Do you remember mega ripples and giant tsunamis? A huge wave that hit the shore at that moment could easily wash away New York. Smaller waves rolled across the Atlantic Ocean and the North Pacific. So, if dinosaurs on land had tried to hide near the shore, they would have been swept away like specks of dust by that giant tsunami. But what about underwater dinosaurs? They were not affected by the tsunami and the fire cloud, but they were trapped. Red-hot poison particles of ash and mud fell into the ocean in huge quantities and poisoned the water. Algae and phytoplankton were destroyed. Because of this, millions of fish lost their food supply. And as a result, larger fish and marine dinosaurs were left with nothing to eat. Large-scale famine triggered extinction in the ocean. Toxic particles poisoned the water for many marine life forms. The gills of fish couldn't extract pure oxygen from the water, which only worsened the situation. Near the Yucatan Peninsula, the ocean floor with its coral reefs and ancient sea creatures was destroyed. This huge part of Earth's biodiversity disappeared, upsetting the balance of the oceans. Of course, the destruction couldn't go on forever. At one point, the ashes cooled and settled to the ground. The sulfur cloud dispersed, the fires went out, and the air became clearer. Warm rays of sunlight began to shine down on Earth again. But there was something sinister about the silence. The planet no longer heard the rustle of pterodactyl wings, the roar of a hungry Tyrannosaurus, and the noise of a velociraptor's fast feet. The storm had passed, along with the dinosaurs. By the way, some flying lizards and small animals survived. Later, they evolved into modern mammals and birds. It wasn't the meteorite that destroyed dinosaurs. Fires couldn't do it either. Dinosaurs disappeared because of the famine caused by the catastrophe. Disruption of the food chain led to the mass extinction of these magnificent lizards. After the catastrophe, life began to blossom again. However, the emergence of large mammals was still a long way off. But now, millions of years have passed. Large elephants, rhinos, and other animals walk on Earth, along with the most unique mammal on the planet, the human.
The Tyrannosaurus rex, the formidable predator, the world-known celebrity of the animal kingdom, the king of all dinos. Since its discovery in 1902, this dangerous predator has fascinated both researchers and the regular public. But despite its terrifying reputation, there were actually other beasts that could defeat the T-Rex. And one of the true nemeses of this dinosaur was the Triceratops, a herbivore. But despite its plant-based diet, the dino was huge and had two nightmarish large horns and a smaller one, along with thickened bones which added to its defenses and helped protect itself from dreadful predators like the T-Rex. This dino was something like proof that herbivores were no pushovers. Its formidable horns were about a foot wide at their base and tapered into mean points capable of skewering any predator, even a T-Rex like Juicy Barbecue. The colossal skull of the Triceratops sported an enormous frill made of protective solid bone, which was topped with hornlets. From the tip of the animal's beak to the spiked rim of the frill, the head of the Triceratops could reach a whopping 10 feet in length and weigh around a ton. This gargantuan construction, the head of the dino, was attached to the body with the help of a ball and socket joint. This allowed the dino to swivel its head around with astonishing speed, brandishing its horns to scare predators away. That's one of the reasons why a T-Rex that decided to attack a Triceratops was actually taking a big risk. The battle could easily go either way. Of course, the king of the dinosaur world could win and get its long-awaited feast, but just as likely, the hunted could become the hunter and end the T-Rex's game. Now, how about we find some more cool and lesser-known facts about those intriguing creatures, dinosaurs? For example, dinos almost certainly did not roar. Scientists think they might have cooed instead. More accurately, they probably produced sounds in ways similar to the way ostriches boom or doves coo. You see, many modern birds use a method of producing sounds called closed-mouth vocalization. Sounds are made by inflating the throat rather than passing air through the syrinx, the vocal organ of birds. In other words, the Jurassic Park movies got it all wrong. A lot of early dino reconstructions appeared under the influence of those scary noises that we associate with modern predators, like lions. So, on screen, dinosaurs have their mouths open when they produce sounds, just like lions when they roar. But real dinos wouldn't have done that, especially not before charging at their prey. They wouldn't have advertised their presence to other animals nearby, not when all they wanted was to have a meal. The Quetzalcoatlus was a member of the ancient group of flying reptiles, pterosaurs, and it was also the largest flying animal to have ever lived on Earth. The giraffe-sized creature had thin limbs, a startlingly long beak, and a staggering 40-foot wingspan. Researchers believe that these creatures could have also used their folded-up wings as legs, so they probably walked on all fours. Scientists discovered the Quetzalcoatlus about 50 years ago, but they still have a tricky time trying to piece together the details of this animal's life. For example, how did it even manage to lift its ginormous body off the ground when flying? Whatever the answer is, this creature is our first real look at the entirety of the largest animals ever to fly. One of the reasons why it's been taking so long to unearth the secrets of the Quetzalcoatlus is because this creature had hollow bones that helped it to fly, just like modern flying animals. So, when you find these potato chips-like bones preserved in super hard rock, you need to somehow remove them without destroying them, and that's a really tough task. The Tyrannosaurus rex was quite a slow runner. Its speed was likely to be just about 10 miles per hour, which is approximately as fast as the speed of an average human runner. As for T-Rex babies, according to hatchling recreations from the American Museum of Natural History, they were pretty cute. About the size of super skinny turkeys and covered with downy feathers. The largest land-based dino was the Argentinosaurus. This massive animal often reached up to 130 feet in length and 69 feet in height. Considering the average blue whale is around 70 feet long, you can easily imagine just how giant that dinosaur was. Many dinos had feathers, and I'm not only talking about avian ones. The largest feathered dinosaur we know about was the Eutyrannus huali, which translates as a beautiful feathered tyrant. It was a super predator and cousin of the T-Rex. Scientists think that the dino most likely relied on its feathers to stay warm. However surprising it may sound, some of the biggest dinosaurs were actually herbivores. Let's take the Brachiosaurus and Apatosaurus, for example. These creatures were giant, but followed a plant-based diet. Now, I'm not sure if you should try it or not, but apparently, you can tell the difference between a simple stone and a dinosaur fossil by licking it. It may not sound like the most legitimate approach, but even paleontologists sometimes find themselves doing this. The thing is, if you lick a potential fossil, it will slightly stick to your tongue. That's because fossils are way more porous than stones. When dinosaurs first saw the light of day during the Triassic period, around 230 million years ago, Earth's continents were clustered together and formed one giant supercontinent called Pangaea. Over the next 165 million years, Pangea slowly drifted apart, and that separated many dinosaur species from one another. And still, most of the world's dinosaur fossils are found in 3 places: the high-altitude Badlands of China, North America, and Argentina have the largest amount of fossils, or at least easily accessible ones. In reality, most parts of the world are covered with fossils, but those located in desert-like environments are easier to find due to the lack of vegetation. Interestingly, most fossilized dino bones aren't bones anymore. The fossilization process often occurs when something gets trapped between layers of sediment or sand. For millions of years, those remnants stay there. At one point, they got surrounded by a layer of water. It replaces the original organic material with minerals. In other words, it's not the real thing anymore. It's a rock-like copy. The Triceratops boasted 3 giant horns sticking out of its head, but its teeth were even more fascinating. This dino had around 800 teeth, and new ones kept growing throughout its life. These teeth grew in sets of 36 to 40 tooth columns, with each column having 3 to 5 teeth, vertically stacked on one another. Some dinos had hollow bones, like today's birds. These creatures stored air in their bones, which helped them improve their breathing abilities. It made these dinosaurs lighter on their feet and allowed them to breathe much more efficiently. The Nigersaurus replaced its teeth every 2 weeks. This unique creature had rows and rows of teeth in reserve. They were hidden away in its mouth, and when a set of teeth wore out, they fell out, and the next row moved into position. Dinosaurs didn't all go extinct at the same time as soon as the asteroid crashed into Earth. Instead, the space rock likely triggered a chain reaction of events which changed the face of the planet. Of course, it didn't happen overnight, but over the next few hundred or even thousands of years. As a result, all but avian dinosaurs went extinct. The word dinosaur came from the Greek language. Deinos means terrible, and sauros means lizard. So basically, dinosaur can be translated to terrible lizard. You may object that not all dinosaurs were terrifying predators. This name might be appropriate for the T-Rex, but not, let's say, the tiny May. Rumor has it that when Sir Richard Owen, an English biologist, came up with the name for dinosaurs, he used the word terrible in a different sense. He described those ancient creatures as fearfully great, as in far larger in size than any previously discovered reptiles.
Now, dinosaurs ruled our planet for over 165 million years, and some walk on our planet even today. Well, at least some of their descendants. Our modern birds evolved from what used to be a scary group of meat-eating dinosaurs we know as theropods. It all started during the Mesozoic era, about 250 million years ago, when a group of creatures called dinosauromorphs roamed Earth. They didn't look like those dinos that might have come to your mind, like Brontosaurus or T-Rex, but that's the group dinosaurs evolved from. These creatures walked on all fours and were as big as house cats. They didn't look as friendly, though, considering they were more like weird lizards with long, thin limbs. As you'd expect, this group wasn't exactly at the top of the food chain, but they were really fast and agile, which helped them survive. Over time, they adapted and started walking upright, so their legs were under their bodies instead of out to their sides. And over time, dinosauromorphs started growing long tails and bigger leg muscles. Their necks became stronger to support the new position they were in, and they even got extra hip bones that helped them move faster and more efficiently. That's when dinosaurs came on the scene, somewhere between 240 and 230 million years ago. Their name comes from the word dinosauria, which means terrible lizard. The oldest dinosaur fossils belong to these fellas that lived in Argentina. This one is even older, but we're still not sure if it's a real dinosaur or its relative, dinosauromorph. Now, considering the size of their ancestors, dinosaurs weren't large at the beginning, more like dogs or horses. There weren't many species back then, so if you could go back to that time, you'd see a bunch of reptiles walking around on two legs. But as time went by, they adjusted to different environments, and we got more interesting groups. For example, small and fast predators, like this guy. They all fall into the category of archosaurs, a group that also includes pterosaurs. Yup, their name may not imply it, but these are not dinosaurs. As some dinosaur morphs evolved into dinosaurs, they got certain advantages, like arms. They could do much more thanks to that. Some could catch prey using their hands. Others could grasp branches. Now, the freedom they got by moving their arms later helped some of them evolve into birds and start flying. Dinosaurs were probably warm-blooded. It means they could stay active all the time. They didn't depend on the conditions around them like, for example, reptiles do. The latter are cold-blooded, and they have to rely on their surroundings to regulate their body temperature. Dinosaurs didn't rule the animal kingdom for the first tens of millions of years of their existence either. Crocs were at the top of the food chain back then. Then the Jurassic period hit, and new kinds of dinosaurs showed up, like those giant plant-eating dinosaurs, for example, sauropods. You know them, dinos with long tails and necks that could eat plants at different heights, such as Brachiosaurus. Allosaurus is another famous dino from that time you will probably recognize. Spikes on the tail, bony plates on the back, you know, good old Stegosaurus. The Jurassic period was that time when dinosaurs started to get bigger and bigger. Then the Cretaceous period came along, and finally these magnificent beasts reached the peak of their fame. That was the time when the mighty T-Rex took the throne and got to the top of the food chain. T-Rex probably lived around 28 years, but it reached adult size really fast. Now, it wasn't easy to survive back then. T-Rex falls into the category of tyrannosaurs, and scientists have found out those fellas were fierce even when they were at a pretty young age. They discovered a fossil of a teenage tyrannosaur that was 75 million years old, and it had two baby dinosaurs inside its stomach. They realized that when tyrannosaurs were at a young age, they went for small dinosaurs, such as these guys, their dino cousins. As they grew older, they started taking on bigger challenges, like those peaceful giant dinosaurs that like to hang out with their group and eat plants. But large predators weren't the only ones that would have made you shiver with fear. That was also the time when fast and smart creatures called velociraptors show up. They weren't some scaly dinosaurs that would catch their prey using those claws in the shape of sickles, like shown in the movies. Their bodies were covered in feathers, and they would grow up to 100 pounds, which is about the size of a wolf. And to bust one more myth, they didn't hunt in packs. Velociraptors probably preferred to hunt solo and use their claws not to slash their prey, but to clutch it. T-Rex and Velociraptor fall into the group called theropods. We mentioned them at the beginning, the creatures today's birds evolved from. But even though velociraptors were covered with feathers, they still couldn't fly. Their wishbones weren't shaped in a way to support flying, and their arms were too short. Maybe it was better that way because during the Cretaceous period, flying dinosaurs called pterodons were the ones that took over the skies. Things had been going really great for dinosaurs until one unfortunate day 66 million years ago when an asteroid hit our planet. It's not that the asteroid itself erased all the dinosaurs right away, but it caused changes in the environment, which made it way harder to survive. At that time, about 75% of animals living on our planet went extinct. The asteroid was really big. When it hit Earth, it created a giant crater in the Yucatan Peninsula and sent a lot of debris into the atmosphere, which blocked the sun right away. For months, dense clouds of dust blocked sunlight. Our home planet was darker and colder than before, which wasn't good for plants. Creatures that ate plants couldn't survive those changes either. So it all turned into a chain reaction when most of the ecosystem collapsed. When the dust finally cleared, all those greenhouse gases that had formed after the impact made temperatures go way higher than they had been in a really short period of time. All land animals that weighed more than 55 pounds were gone. But not everything disappeared. There were fewer plants, but they were less affected than animals, all because their pollen and seeds can survive really messed up conditions for a longer time. So, what we have today is basically the seeds we were left with back then. After the asteroid hit, flowering plants dominated our planet. All non-bird dinosaurs went extinct too. Some species survived as birds. At first, those brave survivors were small, but later, birds evolved to bigger sizes. Now, there's a study that says that if the asteroid had slammed into some other spot on Earth, the fate of many creatures and plants would have been very different. If the rock had fallen maybe a couple of minutes later, it would have hit deeper waters. Less rock would have vaporized and risen to block out the warmth and light coming from the sun. In that scenario, we'd probably still have dinosaurs around. For example, Triceratops was one of the last dinos that had nothing in common with birds. If the asteroid had missed our planet, we would see some of them still roaming around. But since evolution never rests, maybe in a little bit different form. So, check out this creature. What do you think this thing is? Is it a plant, an animal, or maybe even some kind of wild fungus? At first glance, this fossil could pass for any of those ancient life forms. And honestly, scientists have been scratching their heads over it for over 150 years. But now, it looks like we might finally be cracking the case on this unknown species discovery. A long time ago, during the Devonian period, plants were just starting to grow on land. The tallest trees were only a few feet high, and animals hadn't even evolved backbones yet. Back then, massive natural towers up to 26 feet tall and 3 feet wide, looking like branchless cylindrical tree trunks, were rising from the ground. Hey, what a contrast with trees back then. When scientists first discovered fossils of those towering organisms, they were totally confused, as these strange prehistoric creatures didn't look like anything they'd seen before. Some thought they were weird cone-bearing trees. Others guessed they might be underwater plants like giant seaweed or lichens, which are partnerships between fungi and algae. The mysterious objects received a name, Prototaxites. When scientists studied them up close, their internal structure reminded them of a bunch of different things. They couldn't believe a 20-foot-tall fungus or algae could be real, but that's what the fossils showed. Then most scientists decided that Prototaxites were giant fungi. But still, something didn't feel right about it. In 2007, they decided to finally get the Prototaxites mystery explained and ran a chemical test on the fossils. So they looked at the types of carbon inside them and compared them to regular plants from the same time. If Prototaxites were plants, the carbon ratios would match, but they didn't. That means Prototaxites weren't plants, and they receive carbon in a different way, not by photosynthesis, but probably more like fungi do. But then again, they look nothing like the mushrooms we know and love today. Prototaxites were giant, likely the largest living things on land at their time. And even if these strange prehistoric creatures were some fungi of their sort, then it's weird they don't have any living relatives today that would resemble them. So, if we put all this together, it looks like Prototaxites are an entirely different and previously unknown life form that didn't leave any offspring. Now, Prototaxites aren't the only unclassified organisms on Earth. About 600 million years ago, there were no fish, no sharks, no crabs. Just simple life forms like algae and bacteria drifting through calm, shallow seas. But some seriously strange creatures, completely unlike anything we see today, lived among them. They looked like underwater ferns, stood perfectly still, and absorbed nutrients straight from the water. These bizarre life forms were rangeomorphs. They ruled the oceans that were thick with nutrients back then. So rangeomorphs didn't need mouths, eyes, or muscles to survive and just soaked up whatever they needed. Some of them were as small as a finger, and others grew as tall as 6.5 feet. But as Earth entered the Cambrian period, the oceans became much more competitive. Fast-swimming creatures with limbs, eyes, and jaws showed up and ate the same food faster, and maybe even ate the rangeomorphs themselves. The chemistry of the oceans also started to shift, and the nutrient-rich waters became more like today's oceans, where food floats around in particles that active animals scoop up. So the rangeomorphs vanished forever, but scientists still find their fossils all over the world, preserved in ancient rock. They had an incredible fractal design, a pattern that repeated itself at every level, from the smallest branches to the full body. Using fossil clues, researchers built 3D computer models of what rangeomorphs looked like. They found out that these strange prehistoric creatures filled their space in a nearly perfect way. They were like optimized living sponges. But scientists still can't agree on where exactly rangeomorphs fit on the tree of life. At first, they argued over whether they were plants, animals, fungi, or something completely different. Now, most agree they were primitive animals, though they were so different that they might deserve their own unique branch, what scientists call a clade. And then there was Dickinsonia, another prehistoric creature that was so strange that scientists couldn't even agree on what it was for nearly 100 years. Some thought it was a giant single-celled amoeba. Others thought it was a type of lichen, or maybe a failed evolutionary experiment. This bizarre life form lived about 558 million years ago, long before dinosaurs, sharks, or even insects showed up. After many years of studies, Australian researchers finally got proof that Dickinsonia was an animal, and possibly the oldest one scientists have ever found. They solved the mystery thanks to really well-preserved fossil fat molecules stuck in the rock near the White Sea. These molecules were a type of cholesterol, the kind of fat found in animal cells. If cholesterol is present, it almost certainly came from an animal, sort of like animal DNA. Dickinsonia lived millions of years earlier than scientists had previously thought, and didn't look anything like modern animals. It had no head, no mouth, no arms, no legs, and definitely no organs. It was oval-shaped, like a giant pill bug or flattened jelly bean, with weird ridges running across its body. Some were tiny, but others grew up to 5 feet long, the size of a person. It didn't swim or walk, but was just lying on the seafloor, soaking up nutrients from the water or absorbing stuff through its skin. It was tricky to identify because most fossils came from high-pressure rock, where heat had destroyed all the delicate organic stuff scientists needed to study. To get to the good fossils, researchers had to rappel down 300-foot cliffs, dig out huge blocks of sandstone, throw them down, wash them, and then repeat the process. And inside one of those sandstone slabs was the fossil that changed everything. That helped finally confirm that Dickinsonia was an animal, which proves that complex animal life existed before the Cambrian diversification, where tons of new animals with bones, eyes, and limbs suddenly appeared. Scientists think the spot where they found these fossils might hold more clues about ancient life. For a long time, scientists had no clue what other group of ancient life forms, slime molds, were. These weird jelly-like blobs that pulse and ooze on rotten logs and forest floors aren't fungi like mushrooms, though people thought they were for years. It turns out they're more like amoebas, squishy, single-celled organisms that can move around. There are over 900 species of slime molds all over the world. You'll find them in soil, leaf litter, and especially on decaying wood. Scientists found them trapped in amber from 100 million years ago, and it looks just like modern slime molds. Scientists still know very little about how slime molds interact with other species, what role they play in ecosystems, or how they think without a brain, nerves, or a control center. But somehow, they can make decisions and adapt to their surroundings. That makes them a lot like social insects, like ants or bees, where no single bug is in charge, but the colony still works together as a smart group. Even without brains, scientists have trained slime molds to solve mazes just by responding to chemicals and learning from their environment. One way these organisms learn is through a process called habituation. It's sort of like how you get used to cold water after jumping in a lake, or stop noticing an annoying buzzing noise after a few minutes. That's your brain helping you tune out something harmless. Some slime molds can do this too. If they get in nasty conditions, like salty, dry, acidic environments or chemicals, they'll avoid them at first. But if there's food on the other side, they'll eventually get used to it and push their way through. And if you let slime mold go dormant and wake up a year later, it still remembers how to deal with salt. They even seem to be able to decide where to go based on where they found food in the past. With more and more unknown species discoveries, scientists can paint a better picture of Earth's biological past. In the UK, there are around 115,000 mailboxes, with some of them placed in questionable locations. Look here, we're on a deserted stretch of Caithness Moorhead, and here, just smack dab in the middle of nowhere, between the quarry and some moorland, stands a solitary mailbox. It was local teacher Chris Aitken who stumbled upon this oddity near Worth Hill, close to John O'Groats. Now, John O'Groats is a tiny village 2.5 miles northeast of Canisbay, in the historic county of Caithness, Scotland. The village itself is popular with tourists, but only houses around 300 people on a regular basis, and they have their own mailboxes there. So why would someone need one on a random hill? When Chris shared a photo online, someone chimed in with a theory. A while back, an entrepreneur was selling tiny parcels of land near Campster, claiming buyers became lairds with their little plots. Could this mailbox be related to that? Now, the box, proudly labeled Laird of John O'Groats, features the name Thorsten Sommer and an address in Germany. There's a PIN number on the front, but when Chris opened it, all he found was a website link. The site has pics of Sommer waving a Scottish flag and talking about his love for Scotland, even calling himself the Old Scotsman. Chris tried reaching out through the website for more info, but hasn't heard back. It might be linked to Sommer's reported purchase of a tiny patch of land, but buying Scottish laird titles is often seen as a fraud, giving no real title at all. The area around Worth Hill has had some recent police action too, after a body was found nearby. Ooh, could that somehow be connected to this mysterious mailbox too? Well, enough of the detective stories. Let's dive into some high-end fashion, shall we? So, you might have come across that funky image popping up all over the internet, claiming there's a pop-up Prada store in the Texas desert. Well, it's kind of true and kind of not. Yes, there's a shop, sort of. It showcased a whole range of Prada gear worth around $80,000. And guess what? Miuccia Prada herself handpicked the items. But still, you couldn't buy a single thing there. No cashiers, no shop assistants. It was like the place was permanently closed. The twist? It's actually an art installation. Made entirely of biodegradable materials, it was designed to gradually blend back into nature, taking a fun jab at our current consumer culture. But why display goods you can't actually buy? Well, it's a metaphor for the elusive charm of luxury. While it was meant to decay in peace, the hype surrounding it led to a surprising amount of foot traffic and even some chaos. After trying to fend off a few would-be thieves, the artist had to admit defeat. Now it's a hotspot for photos, drawing everyone from tourists to celebrities. Right, you can find a brand purse in the desert, but can you, let's say, find a car somewhere in Welsh caves? Well, the answer is yes, and let me tell you, it's not just one car, but many of them. The Cavern of Lost Souls is a well-known abandoned car cave tucked away in Wales. Once upon a time, it was a slate mine in Ceredigion, where workers pulled out tons of slate and transported it using narrow-gauge horse-drawn tramways. But as the mining industry faded away decades ago, the mine fell into a hush. If you dare go inside, which I personally do not recommend, you'll find two large chambers, but one is particularly noteworthy. The main chamber plunges around 65 feet deep and is mostly underwater, with just a small opening above. Since the mine shut down, locals and the council have taken advantage of that opening, tossing in all sorts of unwanted stuff. You'll find everything from fridges and TVs to even whole cars piled up in one corner. What makes the Cavern of Lost Souls special is the single beam of light that breaks through, casting its glow on the twisted heap of wrecked cars and metal. The water, when hit by that light, glows a stunning turquoise green, creating beautiful reflections of the cars and cavern walls on the still surface. Every now and then, a fragment of slate falls, shattering the quiet and sending ripples across the water. There was yet another weird find in Wales. A shiny 10-foot silver monolith recently popped up on Hay Bluff in Powys, Wales, and it's sparking a ton of curiosity. A local builder, Craig Muir, discovered it during his hike, and he described it as looking like it just dropped down from space. It's made of surgical steel, has no markings, and is super well crafted without visible welds. Muir's find is reminiscent of those mysterious monoliths that popped up worldwide in 2020, creating quite a buzz online. Local Richard Haynes suggested it could be some kind of scientific installation, but with national park rules against unauthorized structures, it might not be there for long. With no visible tracks around it, Muir speculated it could have been brought in by a group or even dropped from a helicopter. Now, this isn't the first strange monolith sighting. Similar ones have been spotted in Utah, the Isle of Wight, and even Glastonbury Tor, where one was humorously marked "Not Banksy." However, it could be easily him. The UK is the leading country in terms of the number of Banksy's pieces of art. As of 2023, there were 70 of them. No wonder, as he is reportedly British and was born in Bristol. The Atacama Desert in northern Chile, the driest non-polar desert on Earth, features a bizarre sight at kilometer mark 1309 on the Pan American Highway, a giant cement hand that towers 36 feet above the sand. Looks creepy, right? Well, worry not. It's not some creepy monster trying to grip you and take you to the netherworld. It's not an ancient relic from a lost civilization either. A professional sculptor created this quirky landmark back in 1992. Despite its remoteness, the hand is frequently targeted by graffiti, so local volunteers must clean it up twice a year. And by the way, it's not the only landmark of this kind. The very same sculptor also created a similar hand in Punta del Este, Uruguay, called Man Emerging to Life, and it represents the idea that a giant might be holding South America in a stone grip. Hey, works for me. Now check out this giant stone sphere hidden in the forest of Bosnia's Visoko Valley. What do you think? Is it an ancient relic or a modern art installation? Share your thoughts in the comments. But to be completely frank with you, which I always am, nobody really knows for sure. Experts think this sphere, which measures around 10 feet across, is just a naturally occurring rock formation called a concretion. These iron-rich balls get their reddish color from the high iron content and form when mineral particles stick together over time. While concretions can take on some pretty wild shapes, the exact process of how they form is still a bit of a mystery. Then there's this archaeologist, often called the Bosnian Indiana Jones, who claims it's actually a man-made artifact from over 1,000 years ago. Spherical concretions aren't unique to Bosnia, though. You can find them all over the world, like these boulders in New Zealand, massive round stones that are over 60 million years old. There are also cannonball concretions in North Dakota. And let's not forget about the man-made stone spheres crafted by the Diquis people in Costa Rica, which are perfectly shaped and arranged, definitely a testament to human creativity. So while the Bosnian sphere is super intriguing, it's probably just an ancient concretion and not a remnant of a lost civilization. Bummer. Finally, some things are so well hidden that you have to go deep down into the seafloor to get a glimpse of them. Once a hedonistic hotspot for the Roman elite, Baia was like the Las Vegas of its time, but now its ruins are submerged underwater. This resort city thrived on volcanic hot springs and attracted the likes of Nero and Caesar, who even built vacation villas there. However, in the 8th century, Baia lost a battle and was abandoned by 1500. As the water levels rose, much of the city was lost beneath the bay. Today, you can explore Baia's ancient ruins in one of the few underwater archaeological